Jamaicans, true Israelites. We love to see the wake up in our place. Because we, remember, it's not Jesus going to come back, it's Yeshua. True Israelites, yard people.
As we are witnessing the decline of America morally, socially, economically, and politically. Why isn't there anyone in the black community talking about solutions? Are you convinced that now is the time to start planning and preparing to leave America for Africa? Do you need solid proof that making this move is in line with the scriptures and the will of Yah? Look no further. The time has finally come for another conference put together by Hebrews to Negroes, creator Ronald Dalton Jr., and truth music artist Lorvins, hosted by Morezuma Yahu of Seventh-day Harvest Teaching Ministry. The Leave America Behind 3-day conference will take place in Archdale, North Carolina from December 27th through December 29th, 2024. This conference will be like no other as we will be addressing current problems in the black Hebrew community and offering realistic solutions. Also on the last day of the conference, Ron Dalton Jr. will be premiering his new documentary movie, Hebrews to Negroes 3, Sound the Alarm, Gog and Magog's army versus the Israelites. With everything that is going on in America, you definitely do not want to miss this conference. Now is the time for a call to action. The Bible says in the book of Proverbs, "A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions, and the foolish does nothing and suffers the consequences." Register today for tickets at www.thenegronetwork.com. For vendors and any inquiries, email us at hebrewstonegroes@yahoo.com.
You never thought this day would come, and no, it is not a dream, it's very real.
And hopefully you guys can hear me. Dustin, is this coming through?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. And let's get Ronald. Make sure that he's coming through just fine.
Yeah, I'm right here.
Ooh,
Right here,
boy, all right. He is here, the man, myth, legend. We'll give a few more moments for some folks to trickle in here. Very excited for this. If everybody that's hopping in is not aware, we usually have some spaces that go into some spicy topics. We kind of unpack history, especially that which is lesser taught by the mainstream media and the mainstream academic institutions. We unpack a whole lot of things that let's just say the people in charge don't really want you to discuss. What's going to be very interesting about this one is in my exploration of the past to try and understand the present that we live in, I've tried to get a sense of some of the religious significance, both of the scripture, of the teachings, and that's the Old Testament, the New Testament. Loosely, we could call it parts of the Torah. We've dug into the Talmud, which has certainly been very interesting. And in some of those explorations, I came across in this little journey Dustin Nemos, who I've unpacked everything from his take on bloodlines, on the Nephilim, which was super fascinating. We've talked about the construction of the world with him and Whitsitt. That included things about the shape of the earth, for example, maybe how it came to be. And this is an individual that I don't always necessarily agree or hold the positions that he's accurate on all of his takes, but I find all of them extremely interesting, fascinating. They're always extremely well supported. We actually did a space on King Arthur, where he made the argument that there might be a link between even characters like Moses or other biblical characters and some of the fictional characters that we learn of, like King Arthur and Guinevere. He talked about who they may have been, where they may have been, what size they may have been. These may have been individuals not just 4, 5, 6, 7 feet tall, but maybe 20, 30, 40 feet tall. And in this exploration, I wanted to set this as kind of a to give some backstory here, because in some of these explorations, one of the things that we found ourselves talking about were who are the Israelites, who are the Hebrews, who are the individuals that we know of as the Jews of the Bible. And when we were doing that, we talked about who may they have been in the era of Jesus Christ, where might Christ have come from. We also talked about they who call themselves Jews but are not, which is a line from the Bible where Christ is talking about the group of people that may try to take over the world one day. There's another reference to the synagogue of something. I'm going to not finish that statement because if I do, the space is going to be flooded with bots. And I tell you all this because in these journeys, I met Dustin. We've had some of these spaces, and along that line and that path, we also came across Tuesday, who's with us up here as a speaker, who introduced me to Ronald Dalton. And in addition to the backstories that I'm giving, I'm of course going to ask each of these individuals to introduce themselves and some of their expertise and their life's work, because we are really blessed, folks, to have absolute experts. These are individuals that are authors. In the case of Mr. Dalton, he is not only an author, but he's also put together a documentary, one that I'm sure will get interwoven into this space, and one that is obviously of great concern to the people in charge. Because it was on Amazon Prime. There's still ways to access it, but I don't believe, if I'm not mistaken, Amazon is one of the ways to get there anymore, because the people in charge are desperate his take removed from public consumption. It's been a documentary that has gotten unbelievable fanfare. I believe it's probably had millions, maybe even tens of millions of people who have watched it. It's been referenced by pop culture figures. It was one of the things that got a very famous individual in a whole lot of hot water with a Nike contract not too long ago, if I'm remembering correctly. And so I set the stage here because these are two individuals. In the case of Ronald, he's had his documentary basically pushed into obscurity out of fear of the people in control. And in the case of Dustin Nemos, he's had a YouTube channel that at one point was gaining not just thousands, but tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of eyeballs in a weekly or monthly cadence there. That was torn down when he started to speak out against this group of folks that I often point fingers at. And so I say that because these are two individuals that not only have dedicated themselves to truth, but they've also been willing to do so and to push that truth at the detriment enrichment, their own financial welfare, on the ability to get exposure for the projects that they work on. So these are two individuals that, when it comes to telling truth, are about as hard-hitting as they come. So I'm very, very excited to have them both here to present this space. We're going to be talking about who were the biblical Israelis, the biblical Jews, where did they come from, and we'll talk about the genetics. We'll talk about the background of those people, etc. I also want to call out that I've brought up as a co-host extra extrapolations that I've done a couple different spaces with, and had the pleasure of having him in some of those. He hosts spaces himself, really thoughtful individual, talks all about things in the esoteric sense that I love to dive into, that sometimes delves as well into religion. And so I think he's going to be an interesting voice to have here to moderate this conversation. And even more significantly, I'm excited to have him in a role where he will basically also be able to interject as makes sense with some of the breaking updates, because obviously in the United States we scheduled this on election day. We're doing it earlier than a lot of the spaces I normally do, both for Mr. Dalton's schedule and then also because obviously probably in about 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, some of those election results are going to start coming in. But as some of the early polling data should start coming in the next maybe 30 minutes or so, I'm excited to have extra up here. So with any breaking news about the election, if there's any states that are called, if there's any big swings that are looking promising for some of those states, we will have him on the line. So don't worry about missing any of those updates as we dive into this. So really thankful to have him up here. Really thankful to have Tuesday, who helped to broker this introduction. And without further ado, what I'm going to do is to turn over the floor for each of these individuals to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask that they go pretty deeply into their personal backgrounds, probably take 3, 5, 10 minutes if you feel it, because I want everybody that's listening in to be very familiar with who you are, your life's work, how you arrived at these passions, etc. And then what we'll do is to transition into essentially a mission statement, because each of these two individuals are going to be competing for the attention and to garner the convictions of all of our listeners. And at the end of this, we'll put up a poll in probably about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, to ask you, the audience, who you think kind of walked away with a better presented amount of evidence to support their statements. And we're going to keep this very, very respectful, because like I said, these are two extremely esteemed individuals that this is their life's work. So we're not going to have any individuals talking over one another, jumping in, no snarky remarks, any of that. It's going to be a presentation of their takes. We'll try to do this in as kind and considerate a fashion as possible. So without further ado, I'm happy to have either Mr. Ronald Dalton or Dustin Nemos. If either of you feel comfortable and want to jump in for your introduction, please feel free to come off mute and do so, and give that background and a bit about yourself.
Go ahead, Donald, if you like.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, my name is Ronald Dalton Jr.
Sorry, Ronald.
Book author, filmmaker of the movie Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, that, like Ian said, in 2022, to Kyrie Irving, he posted a link, Amazon link on his Twitter, Instagram, and it caused a huge uproar in the Jewish community. Nike had a $10 million deal with Kyrie Irving, and they cut him immediately for simply sharing the link to a movie that's still on Amazon right now to this day, and the books are still on Amazon. So there's actually a couple movies that are on Amazon under the same title, Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America. And so in addition to that, since when that happened, the Jews banned me from YouTube immediately, within like a week of Kyrie doing posts, got banned from Clubhouse, got banned from GoFundMe, got a search ban on CashApp, and a lot of Facebook ban, a lot of things happening on my end. And during the whole time, CNN, Newsweek, Washington Post, Beast, The New Yorker, New York Times, a lot of these magazines that were talking about the Kyrie Irving incident, when they did contact me either through email or via phone, they only said they wanted a statement. And I said, nope, no statement, interview. You're going to get an interview. If you want to talk to me, you're going to have to interview me. They said, nope, we don't want to talk to you. We don't want to interview you. We just want a statement. No statement. You got to interview me. Okay, well, we don't want to interview Mr. Dalton, and we're not going to ask you to apologize. So they never asked me to apologize. They never asked me to rescind anything. They didn't say anything other than personal questions, being nosy. So that lets me know that they're scared to have my message appear in the masses on media, TV, podcast, radio, live broadcast. They don't want to hear about the guy that actually got Kyrie canceled from Nike had him in trouble, about to lose his career in the NBA. So because they did all that, I already knew this was coming. So I started a streaming platform called H2NTV.com. H, the number 2, NTV.com, which is where I put a lot of my teaching videos and documentaries and movies that Amazon seems to reject because of the content or just the message that's in the documentaries on that platform. And so, since then I've been trying to spread the truth to America, to Africa, beyond. And currently I'm in South Africa right now as we speak. And upon moving to South Africa 3 years ago, the Jews followed me on one of the first days I got here. They followed me for a block. I don't know how they knew who I was because at the time COVID was still going, people was wearing masks. But right now, to this date, the South African Jewish Board of Deputies have filed a complaint and a movie ban on my movie, and they're using workmen's attorneys to ban the movie Hebrews to Negroes from being exhibited and distributed in South Africa. So this has been going on since last year of March, and they're still fighting me with appeals and different things of that nature to have the movie banned in South Africa, so no black people, nobody in South Africa can see the movie. So this is where it's at. They don't want nobody in the world, let alone Africa and America, to see or hear or know about the movie Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, or the books.
Well, and it's just unbelievable to think. I mean, in my mind, as you were saying that, I was thinking of James Bond, right, or some kind of spy tailing you, because they're so concerned with the message that you're sharing, the content that you're producing, etc. And I mean, look, Ron, someone like yourself, it's heroic that you are so committed to truth that you'd be willing to deal with all of the setbacks of this. Which not only are around your content, but also your personal self and your well-being, and your psyche. I mean, I can't fathom getting off of an airplane and being such a concern to the machine that I look over my shoulder and see somebody following me down the sidewalk to see where I'm going. That's truly unbelievable. But I know that those types of things do happen to individuals like yourself, and that's actually a perfect way to turn things over to Dustin for an intro, because I know he once referred to himself as one of the most censored men on the internet, and so has faced maybe not as extreme or drastic in terms of the physicality, but certainly similar censorship challenges. And so, Dustin, do you want to kind of piggyback off of some of the things that Ronald just said there in his intro, and maybe speak through a little bit of your life's work, your passions, and how you've arrived at this conversation that we're about to have?
Hey, and can you check your DMs?
I sure will.
So, Brother Nathaniel asked me what I do once, and I tried to summarize, and this is how it went. Dustin Nemos, no one. And I wear a lot of hats. The Flens called me a digital super soldier before they turned on me. I'm a historian and scholar archivist at theserapeum.com, which is a hidden his story archive. I would argue probably the best in the world. I'm an entrepreneur and best-selling author behind the Great Awakening book that was banned from Amazon, and hell, I can't even buy it anymore. I'm a citizen journalist, first and foremost, a reporter, host of the Silent War series with over 4,000 episodes, most of them banned, at nemosnewsnetwork.com. I'm the brother of the uncensored .church. I'm the hidden his story of man, myth, and the mystery Babylon religion of the Deep State docuseries and many other documentaries. I'm a former lifelong anti-God atheist turned undefeated scientific fundamentalist, Christian debate champion, autodidact polymath parhesiastes, which is a fancy way of saying I'm self-taught about many things, and I suffer greatly to tell you these things. I've lost everything to be here. I'm an armchair economist and an amateur philosopher and a songwriter of sage songs, but I'm also no one. I am truly one of the most censored and attacked voices in truth media, an end-time sage, master of most conspiracies, not all, but most, who has spent my entire life following every rabbit hole, every conspiracy theory, and connecting the dots, and every moment since 2017 exposing the deepest secrets of the deep state. And I am the second greatest namer of the Jew behind Jesus Christ himself, who was, of course, a white guy. I run unstoppablefood.com, but basically I prefer to just simplify all that and call myself an end times edgelord sage, or simply no one, lest people call me arrogant for stating truths. I've lost millions of dollars to be here to tell you these things, and Reuters even made fun of me about it. You can read about what they said. So, in short, I don't know how much longer I have, but I dove deeper into the history of this science falsely so-called, and just discovered the last 500 years of science is a bunch of pagan Satanists pushing pagan anti-God teachings literally stolen from the Emerald Tablets of Hermes in order to destroy faith and in a creator and to push an alien agenda. It's all Rome's learning against learning strategy under Cardinal Wolsey, etc. So all the science that they use, the atheists and the governments and the Jews use to try to debunk God, it's all nonsense. Evolution, etc. It's all easily debunked. I supported Trump. I saw and can still prove the connection between the Q movement and the Q team and Trump. They're absolutely connected, Q, Israel, etc., but they both betrayed us. I was called the king of Q internationally. I was not a bench player. I was in the thick of it every day, and Ian mentioned I had lost YouTube channels and such. I mean, that's not even the beginning of it. I was banned from pretty much everything you can imagine. YouTube, Twitch, PayPal, numerous accounts, unrelated businesses, Patreon. BB&T Bank actually pre-banned me. Venmo, Shopify, Twitter, even CloudHub, they call themselves free speech. Of course, Elon Musk's so-called free speech Twitter. I can't even join this on my main account, the Dustin Nemos. I have to be here on this burner backup account, which I don't know how long it's going to last. So follow both, I guess. I'm banned from speaking at conservative conferences now. Apparently, like Jack Posobiec and others actually boycott and stop me from getting speaking engagements. I can prove it. I'm banned from Facebook, Spotify, etc. At least my news is banned from Spotify. My music they haven't gotten yet. Praise Yahweh. So I guess that's me in a nutshell. I don't really like talking about myself that much. I don't have that much to say, I guess, if you have questions. But I fight for you. I fight for my people who perish for lack of knowledge, for all peoples against the Jews. And I am here because I care about you, and I have nothing to gain from this except for you. Hearts, minds, and souls for him.
So well stated, Dustin. And both you and Ron gave me absolute chills with those introductions, because the two of you, the passion that you have for what you do and the slings and arrows that you take as a result, being out there, being, of course, publicly facing with your ideas. It's certainly not easy. And one thing, and perhaps we should start with kind of the areas of absolute agreement, which is, both of you are extremely religious men. You do look at these not just as matters of religion, but also the historical accuracies, the locations, the geography, the people, etc., which we're all going to unpack. But we recognize the power dynamics and the current overrepresentation of that one specific group that is currently controlling most of the Western world, if not the world at large. And I say that just because there's lots of areas. Dustin, you and Ron probably could sit around a table, enjoy coffee, wine, whatever would be your beverage of choice. But I want to make sure to harp on that, because there's obviously going to be some disagreements on this topic. It's an area where you guys have a very clear divide. Let's say probably 99% of topics and items you could sit down and jovially and happily discuss them without any areas of friction. And so I want to set that, just because I really want this to be a super informative and kind of positive space. Rather than one in which people are taking down others' topics and all this. And so the way that I really want to make sure that we try to do this is by initially getting a overarching thesis, right? So what is your idea? What is the general concept of who were the Israelites of the Bible, right? And so what I'd love to do is to offer each of you kind of an opening statement. And again, feel free, whether it's 3, 5, even 10 minutes, to present kind of a cohesive message. And what we'll then do is we'll kind of offer opportunities for each of you to unpack the other's ideas, maybe to poke into areas where you think there might be discrepancies. But one thing I'd love to make sure that we do is to keep this as factual as we can, with supporting information. So with the purple pill that we have in the bottom right, I mentioned this in DMs in advance. If there are materials that you want to share, if there are infographics, if there are links to things, feel free to place them in there. And then, since both of you are on the speaker role, feel free to put them up into the nest as you kind of walk through these ideas. It might be a really nice way to kind of visually share some of the messages that you're going to be portraying here. I also just want to take a moment to do two things. I'm going to bring up Goyfather and also XRP, who both did mic requests. What I would do is to ask for everybody that's up here, with the exception of Truth Teller, Extrapolate, and then between Dustin and Ron, if everybody can please just stay on mute. We'll do a Q&A at the end, but I really want to make sure that Dustin and Ron have an opportunity to fully unpack their ideas, and to add to extra extrapolations. We also have Truth Teller up here as a co-host, and so as we go through this space, If there are any updates on the election, on any of the swing states, any polling, early polling that comes out, we'll have both of them, like I said earlier, to relay some of that information. So don't worry, you're not going to miss anything on that. And without further ado, what I'd love to do is let's go, since maybe Ron kicked off the introductions, let's go to Dustin to kick off this initial kind of opening statement. It's a positioning statement that is kind of going to serve as his thesis. And then, like I said, we'll go back and forth with each of them and then allow for you guys to start maybe poking holes where you might see them or inconsistencies in one another's kind of mission statements here.
Okay. If we read the Bible, we are left with an unfinished story where God's chosen 12 or 13, depending on if you remember the double blessing of Joseph's sons, tribes are lost, cursed to forget who they were. And today's Jews and some blacks claim to be of the lineage of Judah or lost Israel, and as such claim status to the biblical people of the Old Testament. I believe extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidences, and I don't believe they have any. If we are to build a case meeting the burden of proof for who has the evidence of being the biblical Israelites, a pretty important issue in today's geopolitical world, and to Christians and others, it will be an easy case as 100% of the evidence is on the side of America, the UK, and Western Europeans as the lost tribes, plural, of true Israel, described repeatedly as righteous law and order, pure blood, Anglo-Saxons, who would spread the word of God to every people and fulfill many highly specific prophecies and descriptions, including being of multitudinous seed, or many, many family, many children. Even Jesus warned us specifically about the Edomite Jews pretending to be Israelites, that they were infiltrating our religion and governments to deceive us. And God himself promised us specifically a Jewish deep state of Nephilim demons in Judges 2 and elsewhere. But that's not why we're here today. We're going to discuss the Black Hebrew Israelite position specifically. So I guess the first claim that I want to make is that the biblical descriptors and prophecies, all actual evidence, only apply to Europeans, and Jews and blacks never fulfilled any. So I want to go through some specific things. First of all, some example verses just to kind of get people used to the idea, I guess, and go through some of the many verses. It's just a sample or sampling. King David, who was one of Adam's direct descendants, was described, like Adam, as being ruddy and of fair countenance. Ruddy means red, to be able to blush, and that is not something that can apply to black people. David's daughter, Tamar, was fair in 2 Samuel 13:1. We see that Sarah and Rebecca were both descended from Adam, were both described as being, quote, very fair, end quote, in Genesis 12:11 and 14, Genesis 24:16, Genesis 26:7. Moses was described as, quote, exceedingly fair, end quote. The daughters of Job, one of the Adamic patriarchs, were known as the fairest women in all the land in Job 42:15. Solomon was described as being white and ruddy in the Song of Solomon. The Nazarites, which were consecrated persons of Judah, were, quote, whiter than milk, end quote, and, quote, more ruddy in body than rubies, end quote. Again, ruddy being a pale but able to blush word in Lamentations 4:7. Even the name, as I mentioned, Adam, is derived from Strong's H119, Adam, to show blood in the face, to turn rosy, dyed or made red, something that most black people cannot do, especially as you get into more pure genetics and darker skin. Lamentations 4:7-8 says, her Nazarites were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. Their visage is blacker than a coal. Of course, visage could mean clothing. They are not known, and by the way, most women in that day would be veiled for modesty purposes. It was not just an Islamic thing. Even nuns still do it. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. It is withered. It is become like a stick. Genesis 21:12, called the seed called Isaac, root of the word Saxon, by the way. Saxon, Isaac's sons, Saxons. Medes Persians called Israelites when they came out of Babylonian captivity, the Sakhe, also called Scythians. And you can kind of trace it from there. The lost tribes of Israel moved north and west into Europe, etc. 1 Samuel 17:42 says, and when the Philistine looked out and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. Solomon 5:10 says, "My beloved is white and ruddy, the chiefest among 10,000." Isaiah 29:22, "Therefore thus saith God, who redeemed Abraham, concerning the house of Jacob. Jacob shall not now be ashamed, neither shall his face now wax pale." 1 Samuel 16:12, "So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy, with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And God said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he." Remember, the word ruddy means to blush red, basically. Psalm 51:7 says, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." No black person in the world can ever pull that off. Michael Jackson tried, got close, and stood up to the Jew, so I respect him, no matter what he became. But the end is not pure white, whiter than snow. Description of Abraham's wife Sarah from the Dead Sea Scrolls, quote, "Her skin was pure white," end quote. Description of Sarah from the Genesis Apocryphon, quote, "How fair are her breasts, and how beautiful all her whiteness," end quote. So, I can keep going into biblical verses, but I want to cover a couple of other points as well. Specifically, like Jesus. Now, all of the other descriptions of his people basically describe what would become the Irish and Western Europeans. But in terms of Jesus himself, there's actually not a ton said about his physical appearance. He was modestly proportioned and built, etc. And from Isaiah 53, which Jews do not even read, they skip it. They don't keep Torah, they keep Talmud, always did. In Isaiah 53, it talks about how he wouldn't particularly be handsome, etc. However, in Revelation, it does mention it twice that his feet would be burned like brass or fine brass. In Revelation 1:14-15, it says, "His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters." So there's other supporting text of this, but I want to basically mention, because this is one of the proof texts that Black Hebrew Israelites sort of mentioned, is the wool hair, white like wool. First of all, and then also the burnt feet aspect, because they mention that and try to turn it into brown skin, etc. So first, in terms of the original word for brass, it was actually kalkol ibanon, hard word to pronounce, Strong's 5474, and it's a compound word of two other words. One of them is chalco, meaning brass or metal, of course, and the other one is libanos. You can find these under Strong's 5475 and Strong's 3030. And libanos means frankincense, or frankincense colored in this case. So the literal Bible Standard translates it as Revelation 1:15, "His feet like unto frankincense colored brass, as they burned in a furnace." And Revelation 2:18, "His feet are like frankincense colored brass," etc. So frankincense is basically a white to pale yellowish color. I included a picture in the thread above. If you guys want to go up there, I think it's like the fourth or so post on there, of my foot, which I'm a good example, I guess, and it was close by, so I had it available. But I garden in Florida in my sandals, so you can clearly see the tan and the outline of my sandal. And I am of Irish descent partially, so I have that 80 percentile plus R haplotype group that Jesus would have been represented as. So virtually the same skin tone as Jesus here. And you can see that my foot is almost identical to frankincense when I am tanned. And I'm sure he was a little bit more tan than I am. I garden a couple hours a day max. He probably lived his life mostly outside and was in a hotter area even perhaps than I am, or at least a drier area. Florida's pretty wet. In terms of I think I lost my train of thought. I was going to cover the wool thing too. We can go into the wool thing if they want to. I don't want to spend too much time on one particular issue because my time is limited. Let me cover prophecy if I have enough time to dive into it. How long do I have left here, Ian?
Yeah, you want to take a couple more minutes, and look, there's going to be plenty of time to unpack additional major themes, right? And so don't fear that this is kind of the end all be all, but just as a kind of overarching thesis, I think if you could take a couple more minutes, and I say that not to cut you short, but rather just because I think if we go for too long, it maybe makes it hard for people to follow along, compare and contrast.
Okay, so we kind of covered the biblical descriptions, the verses. And including also some of the proof texts about Jesus being brown with the bronze feet, etc. I want to talk about another major proof of who the lost people of the Bible are, and that would be the prophecies. If you believe in the lost people of the Bible, I mean, some atheists say they don't exist at all, but if you believe in them, then presumably you also believe in God's word and the prophecies. Now, I've looked into them; they're 100% accurate every single time, across thousands of years, hundreds of times in sync, etc., which gives me absolute faith in God's word. God wins in the end, but Maybe you don't have that kind of faith in prophecy, but whatever. The fact is that all of those prophecies were fulfilled only by one group of people. And I want to start with the primary, as I see it, the primary proof text of the Black Hebrews. And I could be wrong about this. Feel free to correct me in your time. But Deuteronomy 28 goes into the curses and the blessings, which is, I have an article titled The Curse of Jewish Domination. God warned us, follow the law or they will get you. Specifically those tribes that Joshua failed to wipe out, the Canaanites. Those became the Edomite Jews, and they became our deep state, like God called. However, the Black Hebrew Israelites use this to sort of prove, because they were persecuted and enslaved, etc., that it must be them, as if they had a monopoly on suffering, right? In fact, more white people have been enslaved throughout history, and including in early American history. 95% of the slave owners and slave ships were Jews, but the majority of the slaves are actually the little white Irish and European indentured servants who were less valuable and easily killed and forgotten, etc. So let's go through some of the specifics of Deuteronomy 28. First of all, why would blacks be subject to usury, which was one of the curses, when their nations were basically low priorities for the central banking system of the Jews? And in fact, some of them are just basically getting there, like Libya, etc., Gaddafi, etc. So now they're getting their central banks there. Two, these curses are centered around observance of God's eternal law, which blacks never kept outside of places like perhaps Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian canon where Abraham spent some time. And only recently have they heard of them. So maybe some of them now keep it, but that is not historical. Three, in discussing specific blessings, things like the fruit of thy ground and the fruit of thy cattle, the increase of thy kine, the flocks of thy sheep. These are some of the wording used. It would not be applicable with respect to the majority of Africans throughout the majority of time, because they did not only fail to create a wheel or a chair or modern construction techniques beyond a thatched roof mud dwelling, they also likewise failed to develop any notable agriculture on their own, including animal husbandry. They were primarily hunter-gatherers until recent times. Four, with few exceptions, there are a few empire exceptions, trading with, even ancient Egypt had trade of animals with the Nubian tribes. So, it's not 100% rule throughout all of history, but it's kind of a famous fact in the modern sense. The fruit of thy land, thy labors, shall a nation which thou knowest not eat up, and thou shalt be only oppressed and crushed alway, is referencing the profit of taxing these people. And that's something that would be a curse on the Israelites. But with respect, again, blacks, at least in America, are a negative loss on the tax system. They actually contribute negative or less than zero. There is no fruit of their labor to eat up. The verse, you will sell yourself, does not apply to Africans. It did apply to the majority of the slave trade white indentured servants, because they had to sell themselves into indentured servitude, whereas blacks were in high demand, in fact, and they were considered higher value slaves than whites. So the little white Irish children would often starve if they could not sell themselves, or they would be left in oppressive regimes and could not even get to America without selling their entire future freedom and probably die in captivity. They didn't take care of the rental slaves the same way they did the lifelong commitment to their other slaves. So the verse, you will sell yourself, does not apply to Africans, although they were enslaved by the Jews. And by the way, white Christians ended that under William Wilberforce. 6, it also says there will be no buyer. A verse, again, like I said, only applying to the white slaves, in this case, the indentured servants, not the black slaves. They were highly sought, considered higher in value and demand. So that's kind of where I want to just, virtually all prophecies, I have a list there you can go through that has like 100 or more different examples, but spreading the word of God to the world, specific prophecies about fulfilling multitudinous seed blessings. There's specific prophecies about things that would happen or would be done. Pretty much all only fit Europeans. Now, there's a few that are not done yet. You could say, well, they haven't happened and they don't apply to Europeans yet. But of the prophecies that are fulfilled, 100% Europeans every single time. And I'm happy to go into and unpack that on a later time. But I sense my time is up, and I want to defer to Ronald and give him a chance.
No, I think that's really helpful. And just because there's so much to unpack, I want to make sure both of you are able to give kind of that overarching statement without having it be so grand in scale that it becomes hard to kind of keep track of everything. But Ron, I mean, Dustin gave a lot there, and we'll certainly go into kind of picking apart one another's positions. And so, not sure if you did, but hopefully took a couple notes or areas where you might have some major contentions, but without going against necessarily what he said. Rather, if you could provide your kind of overarching thesis, and Dustin, I'd recommend that you do the same, and maybe highlight a couple things on a piece of paper or something, so that when Ronald finishes, we have a couple major areas of contention. But Ronald, if you could perhaps offer your overarching thesis on who do you think these people are, where do they come from, maybe any pieces of the Bible that you want to highlight, kind of the way that Dustin did, and then, like I said, we can kind of start a more open forum after that.
Oh my goodness, yeah, it was painful to hear to hear. But anyway, yeah. So the true Israelites are the so-called Negro black people. We have to understand that the Bible is not a fairy tale book. It's a book about things that happened in the past, and a book about prophecy. And it's a book that has true history, and it really lays the claim that a lot of things were happening or going on in the land of Ham in Africa. And what we have to realize is that the Israelites, they spent a lot of time in Africa, and they mixed and had children with the daughters of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. He had Cush, he had Mitzrayim or Kemet or Egypt, he had Canaan, and he had Put. We do know, if you use critical thinking and logic, that the true Egyptians, the original Egyptians, if you go to the museums in Cairo, Egypt, and look at the mummies laying in the tomb with skin over their face, they got eyelids, they got lips, they got ears, they got skin over their hands, they got fingernails, they got hair. They got a nose. There's not a hole in the nose where the skeleton's at. So they have biological tissue, and you can see that they're not white. As a white person that would die, that's mummified, they will be white to this day. They'll be pale white because they have no blood or no color underneath their skin to give them any type of a blush. So a black person, when they die, usually in a funeral, you will see that they're usually darker than what they look like on earth. This is a known fact. Any black person that has somebody that died, when you go to the funeral and even in the morgue, they will appear darker than when they lived on the earth. When we look at the ancient Egyptians, we can't say that all the pharaohs, that the Egyptians were white people, because they're not. And so the Israelites mixed with these Egyptians. They were mistaken for Egyptians, like Paul and Joseph. They mixed with the brothers of the Egyptians, the Canaanites. They mixed with the brothers of the Egyptians and the Canaanites, the Cushites. The Cushites are in Sudan. The land of Cush is in Sudan. Who are the real Cushites in Sudan? Well, it's not the Arabs in North Sudan that came from Arabia, the black Arabs. No, it's the Nilotic people in South Sudan that created their own little state or country. The tall, very dark-skinned cattle herders that don't circumcise, they are your true Cushites. And we can prove this genetically. And when you look at the true Libyans that ruled the different dynasties of Egypt, they too were also black. You can look at some of the statues and the carvings on the wall in Egypt, and you can see that they have woolly hair, they have black skin, they have Negroid faces. They were not white. Even the ancient Europeans that talked about the Moors and the conquest of the Saracens and the so-called North African Berbers that came and conquered Spain and Portugal, they described them as black. So here we have all the 4 sons of Ham that are black, and these are the same people that the Israelites lived amongst and intermarried with for over 1,000 years in the Bible. And we know, and Dustin was mentioning scriptures about fair and different things of that nature, beautiful, but he didn't tell you that the Hebrew Strong's word for what he would say is white is yapah or yapeh, which means beautiful. So we can't associate beautiful with white, just as we can't associate dazzling with white. The word white in Hebrew is Laban, and many of the scriptures that he read to you does not say the word Laban. However, we can look at the scriptures and see how the Israelites were a people of color, and I can get into that later. But one of the things I want to mention, because what do black people have to gain by doing all the traditions and customs of the Israelites, by having Hebrew and Egyptian in their language, by having oral histories that say that they left Egypt, and they have a story that basically is the Exodus story. and how they got to where they are today. Well, what would they have to gain by saying all these things this time and in the past? Well, they're simply telling the truth. But what does the white races have to gain by making black people's God and the chosen people be white? So you look at history, man can create a book, a chapter, and a verse. He can delete things in a book, a chapter, or a verse, and he can insert things in the book, chapter, or verse. He can transliterate one text to another, and he can authorize that text to be given to the masses. The Greek Septuagint, the Latin Vulgate, the King James Bible. Man can find archaeological finds. He could steal it. He can relocate objects from one place to another. He can create forgeries of one thing, and we may consider these things historical or archaeological proof. Or who are we to question the archaeologists that found the stuff and says it's now in a museum and this is it? They can make up many things to fit their political, economic, and religious agenda. We see this in Africa with the colonization and institution of religion of the Catholic Church and how it's changed up a lot of things for the negative for black people. Man can rename locations and things within these locations that he sees fit with any name that he chooses to fit his agenda. Man can create his own maps of the world back then and today. And mankind can create his own story, history. And when you look at Deuteronomy 28:68, the very word Mitzrayim in the Bible, with every Hebrew word has a meaning. And when you look at the word Mitzrayim, it's just not the word for Egypt, because when you look at the root of why that word is even formed, you look at the way that it's formed, you look at the two components of Mitzrayim, Metzar, Hebrew Strong's word Metzar 4712, it means pain, it means difficulty, it means distress, it means trouble. And when you look at the other component of the word Mitzrayim, it's the Hebrew word tazarar. And tazarar means a tight space, cramp, to bind up, to tie up, to be restricted. So the very word Mitzrayim, which is based off the Hebrew word Metzar and the other word Tazarar, Hebrew Strong 6887, tells the story of why Egypt is also referred to as a land of bondage, a land of bondage. So the very word Mitzrayim is foretelling bondage, difficulty, oppression, dire straits, trouble, to be bound up, to be tied up, to be restricted and cramped, just like the slaves that were shackled by their ankles and by their wrists and by their neck and put into the belly of a slave ship, all cramped up like sardines to be taken to the world. And what does the scripture say in Deuteronomy 28:68? It's the conclusion of the curses of Israel. It says, "And the Lord shall bring thee into bondage again with ships." The Hebrew word for that is oniyah. "By the way whereof I spake thou," meaning these Israelites, "shall see it no more again, and there you shall be sold to your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, slaves, and no man shall redeem you." Meaning that nobody's going to come right after they drop you off at the Atlantic Ocean, the East Coast, South Carolina, or Virginia. Nobody's going to come and say, hey, I got their payment. I could pay them all off so you can send them right back to Africa. I got their payment. What do I got to pay them free? Is it $1 million? Is it $100,000? No, nobody did that. Nobody did that. And so here we are today, and I can go through all the curses of Israel, but the curses of Israel in Deuteronomy 28:16-68, when you read it, any logical person using critical thinking and logic is not going to say, oh, this reminds me of the Caucasian race. Oh, this reminds me of the Celtic Germanic people today in Western Europe that dominate. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to say, well, it sounds like black people. And we should all understand that there's many examples in the Bible that we can look at and just use common sense and say that, of course, the Israelites could not have been white people. They could not. There's no way. And this is the truth that's coming out nowadays, that people are now understanding that the true Israelites, the true Jews, are not white people. And if we want to go into really about the Jews in Israel today and the Europeans, Western Europeans, and all the Eastern Europeans, or the Caucasian race are the Israelites, then we have to take it down to the genetic level on the mother side and the father side, because the Israelites were people that kept their pedigree and lineage based off of the house of their fathers. This means that Israelite women didn't just marry like different men of any nation, like the Chinese, the Indians, the people in Vietnam and Thailand in the Philippines and people in Arabia, people, the Native American Indians and people in Scandinavia. No, the Israelites didn't work that way. The Israelites were a group that lived together and they kept strict laws in terms of inheritance, kingship, prophethood, priesthood. And most of the times, they all fell under the lineage of the man. So you are what your father or your forefather is. And we're going to show you with DNA and other things that when you track down the paternal Y DNA of who your ancestral forefather is, this is going to show you that there's no difference genetically between the converted Jews that are a mongrel race of different races of Japhet, because that's what Caucasians are today. They are the children of Japhet. This is easy. When you read Genesis 10, it tells you that. It tells you that. It's so simple. We know the land of Ham is Africa. We know the land of Shem, where we have the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Elamites, the Arameans. We know all of these nations were in Mesopotamia. And we know that the lands of the north, from Western Europe to Eastern Europe to Scandinavia to the Balkans to Russia, Mongolia, Siberia, and China, these were lands of Japhet. These were not lands where they spoke a Shemitic language or a Hamitic language, an African language. No, they spoke a Japhetic language. So the language was neither Hamitic, meaning African, and the language was not Shemitic, meaning that it had any ties to the Assyrian, Babylonian, or Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic tongue. So there's a lot of things that we have to unpack here to prove that modern day Caucasians today, Europeans, are the descendants of Japheth. And like I say in the movie, in the books, Hebrews to Negroes Wake Up Black America, and on H2NTV.com, that many of the people today that we see in the Middle East, the Arabs, the white Jews, they are descendants of Japheth. Just because you converted to a religion and adopted the liturgical language of the religion, whether it's Hebrew or Arabic, does not mean you're the original descendant of Ishmael, whose mother was an Egyptian, a black Egyptian, and his wife was a black Egyptian. Or you say, oh, I'm a Jew. I'm a descendant of Jacob. No, you can't say that because any person can learn how to read Hebrew. They can learn how to keep the Old Testament laws, or say they keep the Old Testament laws, and they can plant themselves in what we call today modern day Israel, say, hey, we're the Jews. But genetically, if you trace back to history and you do a lot of deep diving and research, you can prove that these people are the descendants of Japheth, many different lineages that converted over time to Judaism. And they migrated, they invaded, or they came in with other ethnic groups to where they are today. And they settled there and they believe in their heart that they truly are the Jews. They believe in their heart that they truly are the Babylonians, the white Arabs. The white Arabs believe truly in their heart that they are the ancient Persians. The white Arabs in Egypt believe in their heart that they're the ancient Egyptians. The white Arabs in Libya believe in their heart they're the ancient Puthites. The white Arabs in Palestine believe in their heart that they're the sons of the Philistines. The white Arabs in Lebanon believe that they are the descendants of the Canaanites and Phoenicians. They believe that in their heart that they're descendants of Ham, Africans. So people are confused right now, and I'm going to give them a shot of truth, and it is what it is, and people can either deny it, but at the end of the day, if you are a logical, critical thinking adult and you listen to what I have to say and all the evidence that I present, then you're going to say, well, using critical thinking logic in my brain, that what Ronald Dalton is saying makes sense. So it don't matter if there's 1,000 people in here that is critical thinking and logic, and they believe that all the Jews are Caucasian, the Caucasian race, the whole Caucasian race. That you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can believe a lie to the end of time. But for those that are listening here that don't go for the okie doke, that actually use their brain and they understand that these scriptures talking about ruddy Adam means red. The red heifer is not white, and it uses the same word Adam. So why are we using these terms as if the word Adam or red means Laban or white? The Hebrew word for white is Laban. The Hebrew word for red or brownish red is Adam, like the red heifer. So we have to start to not twist the scripture and say, oh, fair is white. Oh, Adam, ruddy is white. Oh, beautiful, handsome means white. No, we gotta start using our brain. I'm gonna break this all down and show that the ancient Hebrews were black people, they were people of color, as were the sons of Shem. Because the sons of Shem, they still exist to this day. You just gotta track them down, and I've done that.
Well, some really really powerful statements there. And look, I think there's actually a number of key issues where there seems to be some of the discrepancies, in particular around the verbiage. And so I think, we should give each of you a chance to unpack that, especially for individuals like myself that are not familiar with the language, what it would translate to, etc. But it certainly feels like that's one area that we should address. Another one is just kind of the geography, right? It seems like there might be a disagreement here in terms of where some of these critical events from the Bible are taking place. Obviously, Egypt is a big component of this, right? And so I suppose maybe to kind of break this apart, I'll turn things over, Dustin, to you to maybe highlight a couple areas that you might as well see as areas of contention or disagreement. Perhaps you can pull some components from what Ron just said, and then we'll do vice versa and allow you guys to go a little bit back and forth on that.
By the next, after the next little round there, if we have sort of taking maybe apart what each other has said there, because I have to say, look, I'm just going to say at the stage, if anybody else is feeling like there's a lot on each other's plate, and it doesn't exactly seem to me as if both people have been addressing what each other are, just putting forward their case, and there's a lot there. I think if you're feeling a bit lost, you're not alone, right? So I'd really like to hear Dustin maybe just maybe even pick one or two of those things and find any inconsistency or contradiction within what his opponent, just adversary, just in this debate has put down. That'd be great.
I got a list, and then I'll just pick back up at the thread that you guys have linked at the top. And first of all, I want to mention Cush was the first black man. As far as I can tell, the word actually means black. However, Israelites are purebloods, and they are forbidden to mix with Edomite, Khazari, and Jew Canaanites, and they are discouraged from mixing with Hamites. There are numerous verses to that effect where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc. talk about don't marry them, marry one of your own. Mummies were pretty much all white, in fact, and the Egyptian pharaohs specifically were depicted with blue eyes. Yes, skin fades and turns dark over time, but most mummies throughout the world have blonde or red hair also. The samurai were white people too. Yapei does mean beautiful, but it also means fair. 03303, which Oxford's definition of fair includes light and blonde, such as a pretty girl with long fair hair. Notice it didn't say a pretty girl with pretty hair. Fair means something other than pretty, other than beautiful. Israelites are, I'm sorry, skipping that, I already said it. Deuteronomy 14:2, by the way, for thou art a holy people unto the Lord. No, I skipped that, I already covered it. Another name for Mitzrayim, by the way, was Egyptus, and a name that isn't broken into separate meanings. It's a name, it's not a compound word. It's also definitely not a prophecy, it's a name. And I'm sorry, Ronald, but just read it. It's obvious. It's not an argument, nor is it evident. What I read that is self-evident doesn't at all in any way point to blacks. I'm glad you admitted, by the way, that, quote, Hamitic meaning African, end quote. I agree. Africans are Hamitic from Cush, not Shemitic or Israelitic or Israelite. As far as the white slave topic, I want to dive into this briefly because black people, and I know that we have a victim Olympics because the Jews have basically pushed us into this victim Olympics, and there's a lot of this in our culture. It's not just blacks, but there's a lot of this like victim mindset in the black community around slavery. And I wanted to kind of take your thunder because more white people have been suffering from slavery throughout pretty much all of human history. And we have suffered far more than black people from the topic of slavery and persecution and genocides, etc. So more whites, for example, were brought as slaves to Africa, North Africa, than blacks brought as slaves to the United States or to the 13 colonies from which it was formed. White slaves were still being bought and sold in the Ottoman Empire decades after blacks were freed in the U.S., according to Thomas Sowell, a black man in irresponsible education. In the 17th century, thousands of Irishmen, women, and children were seized by the order or under the license of the English government and sold as slaves for the use in the West Indies. In the calendar of state papers under various states between 1653-6, the following, the following entries occur, quote, for a license to Sir John Clotworthy to transport to America 500 natural Irishmen, end quote. A slave dealer named Selleck is granted a license to take 400 children from Ireland for New England and Virginia. Later, 1,000 Irish girls and the like number of youths were sold to the planters in Jamaica. In Scotland, the Parliament passed in 1606 an act binding all workmen engaged in coal mines and at salt works to perpetual service. For over a century and a half later, whenever coal mines or salt works changed owners, those employed were sold with the estates. They were emancipated in 1775. by an act of the British Parliament, but with certain special conditions that made the act almost a dead letter. It was not until 1799 that the coal miners, the colliers, and the salt workers of Scotland became free men. And I also want to bring up that in the 18th century in Britain and America, the Industrial Revolution spawned the factory system, whose first laborers were miserably oppressed white children as young as 6 years of age. They were locked in the factories for 16 hours a day and mangled by the primitive machinery. Hands and arms were regularly ripped to pieces. Little girls often had their hair caught in the machinery and were scalped from their foreheads to the back of their necks. White children wounded and crippled in the factories were turned out without compensation of any kind and left to die of their injuries. Children late to work or who fell asleep were beaten with iron bars. Lest we imagine these horrors were limited to only the early years of the Industrial Revolution, 8 and 10-year-old white children throughout America were hard at work in miserable factories and mines as late as 1920. You do not have a monopoly on suffering, brother. And in terms of, I keep hearing the words critical thinking.
Wait, hang on, Dustin. I just want to pause there because I think that's probably something that Ronald would not disagree with, and so maybe just to get a alignment on that, Ronald, would you agree that what Dustin just suggested, that whites have been enslaved, blacks have been enslaved, everybody's essentially been enslaved, but that the understanding in the modern West that the transatlantic slave trade was exclusively something that was detrimental to blacks and that was orchestrated exclusively at the hands of white non-Jews is kind of a myth that's been pushed by the people who control Hollywood and academia, and we probably agree on who that is. But would you agree to Dustin's point that whites were certainly enslaved and that the predominant slavers in the transatlantic slavery anyway were Jews?
Oh man, this is look. In America and in Europe, if the white slavery was the largest historical evidence of some kind of slave trade that happened to a race of people, if it was a white race, then they would be teaching this in schools in America,
Jewish schools,
and in Europe. They will be teaching that our people were the victims of the biggest human trafficking event in all times, surpassing the transatlantic slave trade. They will be teaching this, but they don't teach this because the transatlantic slave trade and the Arab slave trade in sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa is the largest historical evidence that in the world of human trafficking from a people's place of origin and the place that they were basically indigenous to or living out for thousands of years or hundreds of years to another country that they had no clue where they were going. They didn't know the language, they didn't know anything. They were going to colonies set up by the Europeans. This was in the hundreds of millions and happened for hundreds of years. The Holocaust was 13 years. I want some white person to tell me.
Wait, hang on. If I can jump in there, because there were some statements. You're suggesting that there were hundreds of millions of Africans that were brought in the transatlantic slavery, and that the Holocaust in National Socialist Germany went on for 13 years. Did I hear those two things right?
So the Holocaust didn't last for hundreds of years. Didn't last 100, and the people in the Holocaust did not go into slavery on slave ships to be sent to the different parts of the world. But when you look at the Arab Islamic slave trade and the transatlantic slave trade, these two slave trades that took majority Bantu Negro people, was in the hundreds of millions of people taken and affected by these slave trades. There's no other race on the planet Earth can say even come close to what Black people, the Bantu people, have suffered at the hands of Arabs and white people and Jews for 400 years and even longer for the Arab slave trade.
If I may resume my points, I've added a few. First of all, Jews would never, ever, ever teach that whites were punished, enslaved, etc. They prefer to teach blacks are victims of whites, along with every other fake government position that they teach in these schools. Now, as I said, Africans were barely trafficked compared to white kids, including the transatlantic slave trade. Period. Whites have suffered far more slavery than blacks, period, over all of human history, including American history. And the Hollow Hoax never happened. Cool story, though. And by the way, Jews are not white. The Hollow Hoax, that's not one of the, that's nothing to do with us, the real whites who have been genocided and burnt and destroyed repeatedly. We can go through multiple examples like Dresden, the Holodomor, the burning of Rome, Chicago, and London twice, etc. The Jews, the deep state, they hate whites. They don't hate blacks. They love blacks, and they want to get together with them and get whitey, like whatever that SNL whatever, late night, John, whatever, I forget, TV. Anyway, it was a famous guy who said it.
John Stewart.
Yeah, John Stewart.
John
Thank you.
Leibovitz was his Jewish name before he
Leibovitz.
changed it to Stewart.
Yeah. Anyway, so back into my thread on there. I'm going to start with the genetics aspect on claim 2, the traditional evidence. By the way, all traditional evidence, genetics, anthropology, etymology, archaeology, archaeogenetics, etc.
Hey, and Dustin, real quick, I just wanted to jump in just to add. Now this is. And I just want to try and critique points that I hear made that I think might be worth questioning. According to statista.com, and I'll share the link here in the nest, but looking over the population number to suggest there were hundreds of millions of slaves brought out of Africa, I think if you were to look at the estimated population of each continent from 10,000 BCE to 2000 CE, Ronald, for what it's worth, that the numbers in terms of total African continental populations would not support the notion of hundreds of millions of people being removed. And so I just want to bring that up as a perspective point of contention, because it sounded like a number that probably was too high to be reasonable and realistic. So I just looked into it, and it certainly would appear to be based on their numbers. So that's statista.com. I'm not vouching for that website. I frankly can't, because I don't know much about it, but it seems like that claim can't be remotely correct.
And I want to repeat, according to a black historian, Thomas Sowell, who I respect very much, more whites were brought to Africa than Africans to America. Again, now going into the genetics, kind of back to the point of who the true Israelites are. DNA research science from Dr. Aaron L. Hayek, who is a Jew, admits, and his associates at the McKusick-Nathans Institute of Genetic Medicine at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine have confirmed that, quote, 97% of the 17 million of the world's Jews are not descendants of Abraham, end quote. So we know it's not them. I just want to throw that out there and get into the actual genetics of this. They also did this genome-wide diversity study in the Levant, revealing the secrets basically behind the genetics there. Quote, Levant populations today fall into two main groups, one sharing more genetic characteristics with modern-day Europeans and Central Asians, and the other with closer genetic affinities to other Middle Easterners and Africans. And quote, we reconstructed the genetic structure of the Levantines and found that a pre-Islamic expansion in Levant was more genetically similar to Europeans than to Middle Easterners, end quote. We have studies, for example, the headline here, DNA study finds early inhabitants of Israel were blue-eyed and fair-skinned. Again, there's that word fair, with blue eyes, once again, just like those mummies were depicted in the ancient statues, all blue-eyed. Geneticists compared the mitochondrial DNA from blue-eyed individuals in countries as diverse as Jordan, Denmark, and Turkey, concluding that people with blue eyes have a single common ancestor that lived by the Black Sea about a couple thousand years ago and spread out with agriculture. They're everywhere from Pakistan to India to Iran to Afghanistan to Europe, etc. Now, present-day sub-Saharan Africans trace up to 19% of their genetic ancestry to an extinct archaic hominid species, Homo erectus or Homo habilis, that is not found in the DNA of present-day Asians or Caucasians. This is from science.org, the study Recovering Signals of Ghost Archaic Introgression African Populations. Now, in terms of haplogrouping, this is a very important point. It's a little complicated, so I'm going to try to go slow. Let me get some water. Okay, now, all true descendants of Israel would be of the exact same haplogroup. Males carry an unchanged Y chromosome from the patrilineal or paternal line, as Ron mentioned earlier, that is kept by the father's side in the actual Torah, which Jews do not do. That genetically remains unchanged throughout time. This line from your fathers to you is unchanged. It's your people's story. Yet all the self-proclaimed Israelites, black and Jew alike, both Hamitic cousins, are actually non-homogeneous in their haplogroups, unlike true Israelites. So you can follow along with the charts at the haplogrouping post in the thread above. The first one I put up there. There's two, so the first one, not the one with all the pictures of Irish kids suffering. And you can see charts that cover the Y chromosome of blacks and Jews. And you can see how they're non-homogeneous. That means they don't all come from the same father. They are what you could say is a decentralized parentage that is not all patrilineally related or lacks homogeneity in the chromosome. And it is impossible for them to all be Israelites because, as I said, Israel all came from one man. So all blacks definitely can't be the lost Israelites or anything like that, nor can the Jews. The The true Israelite haplogroup. So again, Abraham, Ishmael became Arabs, but Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel became the white Western Europeans in accordance with all the other evidence, prophecies, descriptors, etc., definitions, words, mean, things, fair, etc. Now, if Africans were Israelites, the blessing of multitudinous seed given to Abraham would show up within the African haplotypes, A, B, and E1b, being the majority of the world population. But this is not the case. Yet groups descending from haplotype F are found in 90% of the world's population and all Europeans, but almost exclusively outside of sub-Saharan Africans. The aforementioned Afro portion of R1b, J, and T haplogroups. So A1, A, B, and E1b, which represents the majority of African haplogroups.
And Dustin, I think you're going to have to simplify that a smidge for individuals like myself that are not familiar with what you're discussing.
I will. Basically, we all have a haplotype according to our race, our family. Now, in the case of Western Europeans, we can say we all come from one man. In the case of blacks in Africa, they cannot say that. In the case of Jews, they cannot say that. And that bears out in the haplogroups. The R haplogroup seems to be the actual Lost Tribes of Israel haplogroup, like 80% or more purity in the Irish, Scottish region, etc. And this is an important part of Black Hebrew Israelite ideology to sort of wrap in other races like the Native Americans, because they want to say that that's the northern tribes, I believe. Basically, Native Americans are not the northern tribes per their ideology, and you can see this in African A, B, and E1b, because they're not even closely related to the Aboriginal Native Americans, which is the haplogroup Q, which is a brother to the European R, by the way. So we're brothers with Native Americans. Now, GRLA is one famous example of a well-known Black Hebrew Israelite, BHI, whose R DNA results yielded R1b after years of him claiming E1b was the true Israelites. And that would make, basically him incorrect about his thesis. And of course, he's updated it and changed it since then. But, this is where the goalpost moving occurs. You can see some of the graphs of genetic dispersal, haplotype group dispersal, and how sort of whites are all within that circle, but Jews are scattered outside of their area. Every other races are in their own little bubbles, so to speak. The ancient Middle East was white, according to nature.com, with blue eyes being predominant. This is also one of the posts that I've shared for people who want to see it up there. They say, quote, we highlight 3 findings of interest. First, an LLG at RS129-13832 near the OSA2 gene with a proven association to blue eye color in individuals of European descent. Etc. So it's getting a little sciencey. I don't want to bore you guys too much on that point.
Well, and the danger is, Dustin, and I'm suggesting this trying to just help ensure that we get clarity for anybody listening. But I think a lot of the things that you're saying, while certainly I would assume well researched and coming from a place of scientific accuracy, that they're probably zooming over the heads of most individuals that are not familiar with some of the data points. And so, if you could try and just keep in perspective the audience and maybe their familiarity with some of these things, it might be helpful for you.
I had to get some of that out for those who wanted to call me on it. But basically, the blood tells that not all blacks come from the same father. Not all Jews come from the same father. All European Western whites come from the same father, the R haplotype group, not the 3 mentioned Afro haplotype groups, and etc. So I want to also address kind of a claim from Black Hebrew Israelites, at least some of them, that Jacob and Esau basically split as 2 black men, but Esau, whose name means red and hairy, was an albino. And the claim that Esau was some permanent albinism that passed that on through a curse to his offspring, etc. And then you get white people. And I would ask, why do only Europeans have such diverse phenotypes and vastly different skull shapes if albinism, which would basically result in a restricted variety of genetic expression. So if you start having albinism or inbreeding or certain other things, you restrict the genetic expression. So anyway, the short point here is that even with albinism, the skull shape does not change. You can see 2 albinos right next to each other, a black and a European man, and the skull shape still does not change. And skull shape, the cephalic index, is the best means one of the best means available of race testing. And also there's a huge variety of eye colors, hair colors, skull shapes within that white phenotype. So it would not be the result of some random black albino who then suddenly spawned green, blue, pale gray, brown, hazel, etc. eyes. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever with the genetics. Now, in terms of the cephalic index, I don't want to cover it too much, but basically that's the skull shape stuff, and every race has their own skull shape. And the ancient Jews, the people of today, actually the Canaanites, they had an elongated skull. You might see that weird looking skull in some of the history documentaries, or something like Ancient Aliens, or something related to the Nephilim. Things are demons. They had clone heads. They were giants. Goliath probably had a pointy head like that too. They're real, but within the human shape and size, there are still variations. But they had different suture lines, brain capacity, everything. So it was not head binding. These things were real. But beyond that, the cephalic index basically shows that only European Westerners were particularly good or even competent seafarers. And that was one of the prophecies, that they would spread the word of God to the world. The Portuguese, Spaniards, Dutch, Norwegians, and British all have long heads with prominent occipits. The lactose intolerance.
But hang on, Dustin, just to make sure that this is meaningful and on topic, and I want to make sure that we go over to Ron so that he gets a chance to refute some of this. But where are you, and maybe I'm doing a poor job trying to follow along, but where are you trying to go with some of the anatomical critiques here? I understand you're suggesting that there's different bone structures for different peoples and all these things, but I'm not sure if I've seen a connection that's taking the current and getting it to the past.
In short, it basically means that there's one type of skull, not even all white people, just one type of skull, the prominent occiput, long-headed type that I just mentioned, that basically does all the seafaring. Okay, long heads with prominent occipits. You don't see that even with white people who don't have that feature. Even within like recent German Navy recruitment, they would go to their western shores because that's where they would have to find those specific people for seafaring Navymen. So basically, it's a genetic proof text, and I'm in the genetic section. So another easy one that everybody can understand is that God promised the land of milk and honey. 80% of African Americans cannot actually digest milk. They're lactose intolerant. They have problems with it. So it doesn't make any sense. It's the same thing with the Jews. They are also incredibly lactose intolerant, and therefore, why would they need a land of milk? It doesn't make any sense. So all of the evidence is, again, as I said, we're in the genetic section. Once we get to the anthropological section, the archaeological section, if we have time, you'll see we continue this pattern of all evidence, 100% of all forms match one people and only one group of people, the ones who were enslaved more, the whites.
All right. Well, that's some interesting aspects there. You're talking about the skeletons. You're talking about bloodlines. There's also that piece about the milk and honey. I think that's actually kind of a curious statement. Especially if the lactose intolerance piece is correct. But that could perhaps be due to translations of the text, or maybe a different meaning of those words once upon a time compared to their current understanding. So let's go to Ronald and have him offer a chance to reject, refute, or add different supplemental pieces on some of the aspects that Dustin just talked about there.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna go straight to the facts. Now, if Europeans or Caucasians are the real Jews, and they left Israel, let's say when the Romans came and sacked the Second Temple, and they fled into Europe. Basically going off of what he's saying there in Western Europe and maybe Eastern Europe and Scandinavia. So they all fled. These white Jews fled into Europe, but we know that they didn't flee into the interiors of Africa. They didn't do that. They didn't flee to China. They didn't flee to India. They didn't flee to Pakistan, Afghanistan, or the Pacific Islands. They didn't flee to the Americas. So we're assuming that they fled into Europe and the Balkans. Then we have to ask ourselves these questions. We have to ask ourselves the specific question: where did the Hebraic language go? Where did the customs of the Israelites go? Where did the oral history of them being the Israelites go? Because you have the elders and the storytellers that can pass down the oral history to the children. Where did the religion go? Okay, you might say that the Roman Empire made them convert to Christianity. And then we're gonna have to delve into the DNA, because there's a DNA support that these white people have a history of mixing with the women of Africa, the Canaanites, the Egyptians, the Cushites. Do we have that maternal DNA that shows that these Israelite Europeans today did mix with black African women many years ago? So when we look at the Europeans, yeah, they can say one region has R1B, one region has R1A, one region has G, one region has I2, one region has I1 and W and all sorts of stuff. But when you do and you search the genetic studies of people in the British Isles or Spain and Portugal or other France and Germany and other areas, you'll see that it's not just R1B that these people have in terms of the white DNA. You'll see that just like the Jews, they have a mixture of other DNA haplogroups like R1B, R1A, I2, I1. They also have J2, J1, E1B1B, and G. But let's just go to the facts of the Bantu people in Africa. So let's just say 400 years ago, we know the history that the Europeans came into Africa, the Arabs did too, and they colonized Africa. But 400 years of dominance, slavery, and colonialism in Africa, the Bantu people still have their mother tongue, they still have their culture, they still have their oral history, and in some cases, they still practicing the religion that they had from once before, from ancient times. And their DNA stays the same, and their oral history stays the same. So, in addition to speaking English and French and Portuguese, they can also speak their mother tongue. They have a culture that that they practice. And since I am in Africa and I've been to multiple countries in Africa and I have a lot of friends in Africa, I could tell you what I have seen and heard with my own eyes in the flesh. That when you look at the dietary laws of the Israelites, the Bantu people in ancient times, even to this day, they avoid eating pork. They don't eat the duck, they don't eat the horse, the dog, the cat, monkeys, and rabbits. When you look at the ancient times, not modern day times, that these are the animals that they were told not to eat. They also had to drain blood from an animal before they can eat the animal, and the blood had to be covered by dirt. I'm going to give scriptures to back up all these things. So had to do things for funerals. So like when somebody dies, that everyone in the house is considered unclean. This is in Numbers 19:14, and they had to go through a cleansing ceremony. This cleansing ceremony is usually done with an elder or a priest. And the cleansing purification ceremony usually involves water and seclusion. It's in Numbers 19:21. The Israelites in the Bible were told not to shave their head for the dead. This is one of the commandments that God told them, but some of them still do this to this day. They shave their head when somebody dies. And the Israelites, the Bantu people, they often wear sackcloth and cover their bodies with ashes. The white man didn't come to Africa and teach them this. The Jews didn't open up yeshiva schools and teach the Bantu people this. This was Christian people that came and colonized black people. Why would the Christian people tell them you need to practice all these Jewish laws and keep these Jewish customs, black people? And these are Christian people teaching them in their schools, teaching them the language and everything. Under ceremonial laws and practices, in sub-Saharan Africa, they practice the new moon celebration. There are tribes that practice their own version of the Passover and the first harvest feast, which is barley, and the second harvest feast, which is wheat, the feast of first fruits of Shavuot, and the feast of weeks, and the ingathering. They also have a day of rest. The Igbos follow the day of rest. They count it according to the new moon. They don't use a Roman calendar. This is something that the Israelites never did, use a Roman calendar. They also, you see in Africa that they wear fringes on the ends of their garments, twisted thread or twisted hair. You see this in the Congo, you see this in Tanzania, you see this in Cameroon, you see this in Ghana, you see this in South Africa with the Nguni people. You see this in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. This is in Numbers chapter 15:38. The Israelites were told to not tattoo themselves or marks or piercings. Many of the Bantu people, you'll see that the elders, the grandparents, their parents, they don't have tattoos. They don't have piercings all over their body. You will see that the Bantu people, they are the most largest ethnic group in the world that circumcise. And they circumcise when? On the eighth day. They name their child on the eighth day. This is seen by the Bamileke tribe and the Igbo tribe and others. They also take their children to the mountain to circumcise, like Mount Gilgal with Joshua and the Israelites. Also, any people amongst them, including servants and slaves, are considered people that need to be circumcised. So all the males of the house, like Abraham, have to be circumcised. If you're not circumcised, then you're kind of like an outcast, an outsider. When you want to marry a woman, you have to pay a dowry. And marriage typically means that you're not supposed to live with this person, have sex with this person until the dowry is paid to the bride's family. This is in the Bible as well. When you look at single women looking for a man in Bantu culture, when around other men, especially at a wedding, they bow down or lay down on their knees and head down as if they're saying that they need a covering because they are single, unwed women and they're looking for a husband. And in some cases, they cover themselves with a cloth. This is seen in the story of Ruth and Boaz. You see this in the Venda tribe in South Africa. You see in the Ghanaian culture of the Akans, they play a trick when a man is trying to marry a woman. They have women that are sitting down and they're covered with a cloth. And the man has to pick his right bride. And if he doesn't pick his bride by picking the cloth of the right woman, then the people all laugh. And then they say, oh, well, I guess we're not getting married to this later to your bride. This is the same thing that they do when honoring the story of Jacob. He had to work for Leah for 7 to 14 years, and then he got Rachel. In the Bible, the Israelites have many wives. In Bantu culture, they practice polygamy. This is why one man can have many different children, and they're all part of his clan. This is why the Bantu people are the most numerous ethnic group per DNA in all of Africa, outnumbering all the other sons of Ham. The Bantu people also practice a levirate marriage, meaning that if a man dies, then the brother of the deceased man has to cover or marry the widow to keep the lineage of the paternal seed going. This is in the Bible. The daughters of Zelophehad, when they had no men to pass down the inheritance was passed down to the women. If a man only has girls because his son died and he can't leave an inheritance to a dead man, he has to send it either to the brothers, to their son's brother, if he has one, or the women. This is seen in Igbo culture in Nigeria. The test of an adulterous woman, where a woman has to drink a bitter potion or concoction, and if she is a victim and is truly an adulteress, then she will get sick and die. If she does not get sick and die, then she was cleared of her claim of being an adulteress. This is practiced in the Shona tribe in Zimbabwe. Homosexuality and bestiality is forbidden in Bantu culture in sub-Saharan Africa, although the United States keeps trying to push these things on Uganda and other countries. Man is preferred to marry a virgin. If he cannot marry a virgin, then the woman has to get paid a lower dowry, and in some cases she has to go through a cleansing ceremony, which requires seclusion and water. In the Bantu culture, when you plant a fruit tree, you're not supposed to eat of it for 3 years. You're supposed to wait 3 years. This is in Bantu culture. I'm here in South Africa. The Nguni people are here. The Zulu, the Xhosa, and the Ndebele, they are here. The Swati, this is in Leviticus 19:23. They say, oh, when you plant a fruit tree, you got to wait 3 years, Ron. Oh, okay. That's in the Bible too.
So just to jump in here, Ron, real quick. So the comparison here with the Bantus is basically to demonstrate similarities in cultural norms and perhaps behavioral or otherwise genetic commonalities. Just out of curiosity, this is also then presuming that the Holy Land, quote unquote, is within Africa, right? In this theology that you're presenting, is that right?
Right, and that's a whole other debate because I touch on that too in my movies on H2N TV.
Okay, oh, sorry, go ahead.
What I'm doing right now is showing you how the customs of the Bantu people are identical to that is seen in the Torah. And no white man, no Jewish person came with their yeshivas and said, okay, we're going to open up all these yeshivas and teach the Bantu people Jewish culture. These pagan black people, savages. No, these people have been doing this prior to the white man's arrival into sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm going through basically almost all of the 613 Torah laws in the Bible in the Old Testament. Okay, and just tell me when I got like a minute or two left and I can wrap it up. So again, in Leviticus 17:13, in Bantu culture, the blood of a slaughtered animal has to be drained into the ground and covered with dirt. A person that is consecrated to God is considered a Nazarite, or a person that is basically a Nazarite is consecrated to God. That's what it means. And they cannot cut their hair until a priest or somebody decides it's time to cut their hair. Their hair locks up immediately when they're born. This is seen in the Igbo and Yoruba culture under the term Dada locks. This was in Leviticus. This was in number 5-6. In Leviticus 25, it talks about leasing the land, the right of redemption, meaning that you can sell the land, but you can't sell it forever, but you can lease the land for a Jubilee year. So in the Bantu culture, you can lease the land to the Chinese, to the Indians, to the Arabs, but only for 50 years. After 50 years, the land returns back to the owner, and that foreign nation in Africa that wants to continue to use the land for farming has to redo the indentures. Also, in Bantu culture, in the Shona tribe in Zimbabwe, they reap the harvest of the edge of the field, but they leave a corner of the field for the poor and the foreigner and the stranger and the widow to collect the crops off that portion of the land. This is in Leviticus 19, verses 9 to 10. The Shona tribe and other Bantu tribes, they say that you're not to gather the fallen fruit of the vineyard. You're supposed to leave it for the poor, the widow, the foreigner, the alien, and and the poor. This is in Leviticus 19:10, Deuteronomy 24:19. Let's keep going. And the Akan people in Ghana, Deuteronomy 18:13, they have to present the right shoulder of their livestock to the priest for sacrifice. In Leviticus 25:23, they are forbidden, the Bantu people are forbidden to sell the land forever to another nation. But the white man came in, he stole the land. He didn't ask for it nicely, he just came and took it. So we see in Exodus 39 that you can only burn incense on an altar. It's still done today in sub-Saharan Africa. Leviticus 10:9 says a priest has to be barefoot and not drunk and unkempt when he's in the holy place or in the temple. The Bantu people still do this to this day. In Leviticus 17:14, Exodus 24:8, Moses sprinkled blood on the children of Israel as a sign that they keep their covenant law of obedience to the laws of Moses. They're still sprinkling blood on people in altars in sub-Saharan Africa to this day. Salt on all sacrifices. This is still seen in Bantu culture, Leviticus 2:13. When you want to purify yourself in Bantu culture, you have to go to a running river or a lake to cleanse the pure yourself. This is Leviticus 15:16. And the Bible says that you're not supposed to kidnap a man and sell him. This is worthy of death. Now, it's not talking about war and spoils and booty. It's talking about when you just go to another land and just kidnap somebody that's of another nation and then sell him. This is what the Christians told us when they came to Europe. I mean, when they came to Africa, they came with the Bible, but they didn't tell us that in the Bible it says you're not supposed to kidnap black people and sell them. That is a punishment of death in Leviticus. The Bible says not to murder. The Bible says not to lie, to steal, to cheat. These are all things that the Bantu people typically are not to do in their village. If they are caught stealing and doing these things, murder, then the village will take care of you and they will hand your own justice to you once the village elders or the judges decide your fate. This is in the Bible as well. When you look at the Exodus 22:24, it says that you are supposed to lend without interest to the poor. Don't press the poor for repayment. The Bantu people are naturally hospitable, friendly people, and they will share with you, they will help you. But when you come trying to steal, kill, and destroy, then they're going to fight back. But as you see in Africa, black people are naturally hospitable people to all races. They're not necessarily going to not service you or treat you or take care of you at a restaurant or a store because you're Chinese or Arab or white or East Indian. When you look at the scapegoat sacrifice in Leviticus 16:22, where it says you have to cast your sins onto a goat and then you let that goat run off into the field to Azazel, or you kill the goat. This is seen in the Isoko and the Ishan tribe in Nigeria. When you have when a woman has a child and the child is a girl, she is unclean twice as long as if she had a male child. This is seen in Leviticus 12 verses 1 through 5. This is seen in the Ewe culture in Ghana and Togo. The Israelites also went to high places and mountains to pray and to worship and to talk to God, to get an answer from God. This is seen in the Old Testament, as well as Christ often went to fast and to pray on top of the mountain, including the transfiguration of Christ is on top of the mountain. These are what you call the high places. The high places in the Bible is also mountains. The Bible says that the land of Canaan is a land of mountains, hills, valleys. streams, lakes, brooks, torrents, aka waterfalls. When you look at Israel today, there's only one main lake. It's not even a sea. It's the Lake Kinneret. And so when you look at the Dead Sea, it's not even a sea. It's a lake. It's small. Both the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee is smaller than the smallest lake in the African Great Lakes region in terms of surface area. But they call it the sea. And when you look at, and this is a side note, when you look at Mount Zion, there is no Mount Zion mountain, high mountain in Israel. It's not there. It's just a place right next to Jerusalem. So there's a lot of things that we have to understand, because the Bible does say that the land of Canaan is the land of milk and honey. It says it's a good land, and it says it's a large land. The Hebrew word for large is rakab. Large means large, spacious, wide, vast. The state of Israel is 27 times smaller than Egypt. So why would God bring them out of Egypt? And they were numerous in the land. They multiplied in the land. They almost became more than the Egyptians, lest the Egyptians had to kill the firstborn son so that they don't outnumber them and gain allies. So the Israelites were numerous and filled the land, as the Bible states. Then why would God take them from a large land and take them to a land that's 27 times smaller than the land of Egypt and say, this was your land forever? All your generations are going to have to deal with this land and make use of it. And this land is not a land flowing with milk and honey. Matter of fact, the majority of all honey producing countries, out of the top 50, Israel is not on the list. And if you go to Africa, you're going to see a ton of countries that they are producing and exporting honey on the list. And of course, we all know that Africa has an abundance of livestock, and livestock produces milk, which Israel does not seem to fit the bill. So when we look at just customs alone that the Bantu people are practicing, and even ancient European and Arab historians came into Africa saying that these people are practicing Judaic type of culture. The culture is Judaic. They said this is all in the movie Hebrews to Negroes Wake Up Black America, the movie that the ADL and the South African Jewish Board definitely do not want you to see. They want to ban it because they know in the movie it proves that when the Europeans and the Arabs came into sub-Saharan Africa, that all their traditions and customs was straight out the Old Testament. But yet these people did not all homogeneously have the same DNA as you see in the different dynasties of ancient Egypt. So if their DNA doesn't line up with all the dynasties, the pharaohs, the male kings of Egypt, then who are they? When they say they left Egypt and migrated south with a great leader, he had a magic stick and he crossed a body of water and they landed to where they are today. Who are these black people that left Egypt that don't have the same Y DNA, paternal DNA, as the pharaohs of Egypt in their tombs from the 25th dynasty all the way to the newest dynasty? Who are these black people that left Egypt? Well, the Israelites left Egypt as a mixed multitude.
They're called the Lemba tribe.
Hang on, anti-Semite. Hang on, I'm going to remove you from speaker. Can we please not interrupt? We will do a Q&A momentarily, but this is really for Dustin and for Ronald. So I don't think that was very respectful. One thing I do want to add really quickly, Ronald, and I'd love for you to then land the plane and we can transfer things over to Dustin. But I did not want to say this while transferring things to Dustin because I do want to give you a chance to respond to what I'm about to say. But I did just look up for what it's worth. And again, this is the second time I'm doing so. I don't want to come across as biased by any means, but because it was a data-driven comment, I just looked into the largest exporters of honey. Now, there's lots of reasons for this, right? It could be manufacturing, it could be supply chains, it could be whatever. But it does, as of what year is this? 2023. Europe accounted for 40% of all international honey sales. The totality of honey sales out of Africa was 0.6% of the global supply. So just a very, very tiny amount. So I figured I would add that in there.
Yeah.
And like I said, I didn't want to say this while transferring things over to Dustin because it would have felt kind of subversive to your argument. But I did want to just add that in there and let you respond to it before we go to Dustin.
Yeah, so with that, in order to have honey, most times honey is collected from trees, and you get the honey because the bees are putting their nest in the trees, and people climb the trees and they collect the honey. But nevertheless, but old days, not modern day honey collecting days. But when you look at even considering and say, okay, let's say Europe is Israel. Well, then the Bible says it talks about lions, leopards, ostrich, hyena, jackal, dog, rhinoceros. It talks about camelopard. Camelopard is a giraffe, and that's the Greek word for giraffe. In the Greek Septuagint, it mentions monocorus, which is a rhinoceros. It mentions bear. In Langham West Fossil Park in South Africa, they have tons of bear skeletons in the Western Cape. On site where they found all these bear skeletons in the Western Cape in South Africa, where there are lions and rhinos and all types of animals, you've seen all the habitat for lions, leopards, ostrich, wild ass, not a donkey, a zebra, elephants, zebras, ostrich, African ibis, all these animals, crocodile, all these animals are in. We know that giraffes are not indigenous to Europe. We know that ostriches are not in Europe. We know that lions are not indigenous to Europe. We know that leopards are not indigenous to Europe. We know that hyenas are not indigenous to Europe. We know there's so many things in Europe that does not have the animals that are listed as being in the land of Canaan. So that being said, even saying the honey is in Europe does not recollect that, okay, the land of Canaan is Europe, because that makes no sense, because then where's the land of Japhet? If the land of Canaan is Europe, then is the land of Japhet, is it China? Is it India? Is it Central Asia? Is it Scandinavia? Is the land of Japhet in Africa? Is the land of Japhet in the Pacific Islands? Is it America? So there's a lot of problems when you try to go into that direction. And I'm just giving you the facts. And after Dustin says what he has to say, I'm going to show you the language of the Hebrew and the Egyptian in the language of the Bantu people, which we don't see in any of the European branch language families. So one thing we have to look at is that where is the traditions and customs? Where did it go in the European people that's not Hebraic Torah customs? And then after that, we're going to go to the language, the Hebrew and the Egyptian, that's still embedded in the language and mother tongue of the Bantu people, that's not seen in the European languages at all.
My turn?
It sure is, I do see that there's some hands. I just want to call out. We will do a Q&A. We'll probably go for about 30 to 45 more minutes with a back and forth with Dustin and Ronald, and then we will open things up. We'll probably keep the Q&A just a little bit tighter than we normally do, just because I want to be respectful of these two individuals' time, and they've already dedicated almost 2 hours to this. But yeah. So Dustin, why don't we go back and I do think Ronald, just to let you call it out, because you had said language, which I think is a big piece of this. What was the other key point that you mentioned there?
Talking to Ronald, right?
Ronald, can you hear me? Yeah. Ronald said he was going to talk about the language and one other component.
So we got language.
Bantu customs.
We got oral history. We got traditions and customs, which I already covered. Then we have, of course, DNA, which if we got time, I'll cover that last. But yeah, so the main thing is the people that are Israelite are going to have a language. They're going to have traditions and customs. They're going to have oral history. And lastly, when they migrated and moved from one place to the next, because they mixed with other people and left as a group, then they're going to retain the DNA, no matter if they move to the Americas, like slave trades, or they move to Europe, like the Arabs that left the Middle East during ISIS and flooded into Europe. Well, they still have the same DNA as the people that they left. So we're gonna cover all these things, but Dustin can go ahead and do what he has to do now.
Wonderful. And thank you so much, Ronald. You and Dustin have both been so respectful to one another. I'm really just humbled by the way that you guys have conducted yourself in this, and it's been really nice that instead of trying to tear apart one another, you're doing this kind of point counterpoint and walking through it in such a fashion. Really quickly, just to check in with Truth and Extra, just want to see some of your thoughts on some of the debate so far between the two individuals. Not so much, who do you feel like's making a more compelling argument, but just kind of thoughts on the topic at large, and then also check in to see if there's any updates on the election side of things. So Truth and Extra, do you have anything for us?
Yeah, go ahead, Extra, if you want to jump in.
Well, I wasn't sure if you were there. If you want to go ahead, I'll go after you.
Yeah, there still seems to be some confusion about the origins of slavery, and the Jews have been behind it for. Some will acknowledge the transatlantic slave trade and the papal bull that Alexander VI signed off on. He was, of course, Jewish and who owned the slave ships and who primarily profited from slavery. So, this notion that, it's the whites behind it, and, where's also the acknowledgement that there's North Africans who carried out slavery of primarily, Scandinavians, Swedes, Italians, etc., between the 16th and 19th centuries. Don't see the accountability there either. And by the way, none of them ask for any type of reparations that happened, right? There's been slavery for over 2,000 years. The Jews have been doing slavery for a long time, for thousands of years. So this notion that it gets blamed on the white man, when, again, I pointed this out many times in the past, as far as white countries go, white Christian countries, they have debts. They're the ones that are constantly having to ask for loans to be able to manage their economies. It's the Jews that have accumulated all the wealth, the gold, the silver, the natural resource wealth, etc. It's in their vaults. So it's some acknowledgement there would go a long way, I think, in trying to, heal the rift that seems to persist because false information gets spread. Even though you can go up and consult the Jewish Virtual Library, they take all the credit for the slavery that they've done. they acknowledge readily who the main slave owners were. You can look up guys like Judah Benjamin, the DeWolf family, the Mosata family, Aaron Lopez, etc. There's so many of them. You can see who the main slave ship owners were. And you can also see who actually ended slavery as well. It's primarily white men. Alexander II in Russia, and of course the Emancipation Proclamation was issued by Abraham Lincoln. So, and it was essentially white men that sought to end slavery, and it was let's just say the other entity that didn't want that. So, in terms of the rest of the debate, yeah, I've been tuning in and out for the most part. I've kind of been trying to also follow the election results. It has been very, very tactful, respectful, and easy to listen to. And I'm going to go back and listen to it carefully, bit by bit, because there's a lot of detailed information there. So I'd recommend most people listen to it twice. And I like the flow of the debate too. It's been energetic and quite intellectual. So I'll pause there before I comment further.
Okay.
Okay, well, just hold on 1 second, Dustin. I'll be pretty quick here. I'm going to say, from my perspective, I'm going to say something slightly different, and that is that I've heard from both of you, but I mean, the debate has happened as it is, but for me, it hasn't felt like much of a debate. It's felt like both of you have just been running through sort of pre-prepared articles that you've written. And by the way, I would like to read your article again, and I intend to, after this. But there hasn't been much, I suppose, engagement between the two of you. Now, maybe that's a good thing, because it certainly hasn't been adversarial. When I use the word adversary, I just meant as in like just two opponents in some kind of game, but there's nothing personal here. What I'm going to say is that from my perspective, I have lived and worked in Johannesburg, and I've spent a lot of time also in the Western Cape, and I've also traveled around in Namibia and Zambia and Botswana, and put my toe into Zimbabwe. And I'll just say that I learned the word for it, Ari. It's labolo, or there might be another word in Zimbabwe. I can't quite remember it now. But anyway, I have talked to some people, and it's just, to me, that never seemed like that it was something that we Europeans or anybody taught to them, or that they learned from any book. It was just fairly obvious that, or actually, it almost seemed contrary to our modern way of living, where it would seem very anachronistic for a man to say to a girl's father, "Oh, there's some money for your daughter." All the feminists would be up in arms. So I suppose in a way we find it kind of, oh, that's amusing, but good, that nobody felt that there was anything not politically correct about that, and because we think that it's like buying a woman, if you would say that, right? But plenty of men were saying, "Oh yeah, I have to give a couple of cattle and this kind of thing, whatever else," and it was maybe like that his wife must be extremely good looking, or something great about her that he was giving this many cattle for it. So, but I know I'm just picking it as one thing. I know you were sort of using it as proof that therefore, if that's what the Israelites did, then that we must have been them, sort of thing. And I would just say, look, we kind of have to say there might be certain things that are universal across humanity. And if that's, I would just say from now on, maybe both of you could pick just your best points, right? And then maybe we could have some gentlemanly, just 1 point at a time, sort of saying, well, I refute this and I refute that. And I would kind of generally prefer that, but obviously keep it civil. That's what I'd say for now. Thanks a lot.
Okay. So to do what I have to do here, as they said, it should please extra. To be clear, I have refuted every point so far that Ronald has made. I keep saying Donald because we're like election, sorry. The true Israelites were prophesied, by the way, to forget their ways. So to Ronald's point about Bantu customs and traditions, this is a point in my category of evidence. If they remembered the ways, then they are not the people of Israel. Blessed, I would not that ye be ignorant of this. Beloved, I would not that ye be ignorant of this, but forgetfulness has come in part upon Israel for her sins. It was said in Scripture. I'm going off memory. Now, the true Israelites also are told not to cut the corners of their head, not to shave their heads. So, that it's not quite right there. But as Ronald said, anyone can fake being Israelites and learn how to keep the law. He said it himself earlier. This is merely an example of how white Israelites would bless the world in prophecy. So you're welcome, Bantus. Also, we're all supposed to keep the law, by the way, including the foreigner and the stranger. So they are doing it wrong in a number of ways. They're doing it better than the lawbreaker Christian branches. I will say this, especially the Roman and Greek orthodoxies, though, it sounds like. And the village elders in Mosaic law do not, quote unquote, decide the fate of sinners. The Bible has its own rules and punishments, so to speak, based on 2 to 3 witnesses under Mosaic law. Now, in South Africa, to your point, that like blacks were there, whites came and started making trouble, basically, in my words. In South Africa, the Dutch were there first, and the Africans came and took it. It's not a one-sided issue entirely. And as we see in South Africa, to your other point about warm and inviting culture, Africans' national anthem is to, quote unquote, kill the Boer. That means white people. I not only find this less than the warm and inviting that you describe, I do not find it of the character of the people of Abraham either. Much like Gaza today, these are not the real Jews. You can see it in the character of their violence toward their neighbor. Blacks are disproportionately represented in all forms of sin, especially violence across the Western world and anywhere else they inhabit. So they are not killing the Boer, being good Christians or Hebrews, etc. And I've heard endless numbers of stories of children being boiled alive in bathtubs, etc., with government issued cell phone jammers, big backpack, expensive things that they carry around to the farms. So the white Afrikaners in South Africa are being genocided by their black government. And I encourage everyone, by the way, to watch The Real Jews Were White, The Synagogue of Satan and Identity Theft of European History. This is my documentary, one of many. Now, by the way, the Hebrews left Egypt and went into Africa or Canaan, where all those animals are. They crossed the Red Sea and went into the land of Canaan. Canaan is Africa. Now, there are contradictions all throughout the black Hebrew Israelites, just like with the Jewish claim to being of Judah. First of all, I want to note that Haile Selassie of Ethiopia does not descend from King Solomon. He was a brutal tyrant who continued to enslave his own black people long after Europeans stopped Jewish slavery in Europe and America. Also, one of the biggest schools of BHI thought, Sakari, affirmed that Celtic peoples are Israelites. They just say the original Celts were black. And when it comes to black people being the original Israelites and Christians, the question that stumps them is, where did they learn the Bible? Was it from white people in America or black people in Africa? Now, Hebrews to Negro's creator, Ronald Dalton, Jr. claims that the Israelites of Egypt never crossed the Red Sea, as famously depicted in Scripture in Exodus 14:21-29. His reason? Dew could not exist on sand, as if Yahweh Almighty could not make it so. And by the way, it said midbar, meaning wilderness, not desert. Be careful which translations that you trust. Now, in Exodus 14:29, but the children of Israel walked upon dry land in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall unto them on their right hand and on their left. Famous story, everyone's heard it. Moses parted the Red Sea. Well, according to Ron, that did not happen. Now, he also claims that quote-unquote unicorn should be rendered rhinoceros in Scripture. Yet in Deuteronomy 33:17, we see that these ra'im, as they were originally called, at least have two horns. The Israelites migrated to Africa, not from Africa, the land of Canaan. And as far as language goes, Afro-Asiatic language families are not linked to Hebrew in any way, but all European languages are from the same original source. Just briefly as a couple of examples, the language of English, German, Spanish, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit in order for the word father. Father, vater, padre, pater, pater, pitar. Now, back to my other points. I need to take a breath there. In terms of reparations, I'm all for giving the Jews money to the blacks to go be kings in Africa so everyone can have their own home again. They brought you here and forced us to fight each other. I love you. I want you to have your own home back. I don't think that what they did was right. And I want to have our own home back. And the clergy plan is basically to kill all whites. I think we can agree the Jews hate us. So, regardless of what happens with this particular debate, I think the Jews have all the money. So if you want the reparations, you're going to have to go after them because whites have no power or money in Western nations. We're being targeted right now for like race wars in the UK, Appalachia and Maui and all the things that are happening in the US, etc. And I also want to point out that you earlier basically said you did not understand haplogroups, but then you mentioned haplogroup and DNA. So I would like to understand your position when you get a chance on your time, I guess, more in detail, like maybe about what your position on DNA is. I don't fully understand it. Just to point out a couple of things from archaeology. I mean, I haven't even got into anthropology, archaeology, heraldry, etc., etymology, the language and stuff we barely touched on. I'll quote Darius, because Darius was a Persian, and still side issue, but Darius said he was an Aryan. I am Darius, the great king, the king of kings, the king of many countries and many people, the king of this expansive land, Persian, the son of a Persian, Aryan from the Aryan race, from the inscription in Naqsh-e-Rastam. And this is, again, a pattern, white mummies everywhere. In terms of anthropology and references to Jesus outside of the Bible, historical references. Publius Lentulus was a first-hand eyewitness, described him as tall, golden hair, gray eyes, rosy skin. Pontius Pilate described him, first-hand witness, described him as golden hair and beard with fair skin. Gamaliel, first-hand eyewitness, thin, golden hair, soft blue eyes. We could keep going down the other, historical syncs with that, like the Agbar description, those by Nicephorus Callistus, St. John Damascene, the Book of Painters, etc. People want to go look up those keywords anyway. So for another good example would be an ancient depiction of the Hebrews on the mosaic from the Huqoq, I don't know how to pronounce it, 5th century AD. Clearly white high priest Hebrews meeting with the I think that's the soldiers of Alexander the Great, and maybe even Alexander the Great himself. They're kind of exchanging gifts and such. So you see the Hebrews over there on the left, definitely not black people. If you're following along on the images in the vein, you'll see the thread, you'll see that. Anyway, so the Troy was founded by Hebrews, by the way. So everybody's heard of the famous Battle of Troy. They were cousins of Israel. According to Diodorus Siculus, the Library of History, Zerah, by the way, means a rising of light. So a character from the Bible, Zerah, some of his descendants left Egypt before the Exodus, and they sailed to Greece and founded Troy. Quote from Diodorus, all the foreigners were forthwith expelled, and the most valiant and noble among them, under some notable leaders, were brought to Greece and other places. As some relate, the most famous of their leaders were Danaus and Cadmus, but the majority of the people descended into a country not far from Egypt, which is now called Judea. The leader of this colony was one Moses, a very wise and valiant man. End quote. So Trojans and Greeks were cousins of the Israelites and founded, in fact, Troy. Aeneas, by the way, escaped Troy to found Rome. So that's where you get Rome. They're all descendants of the Hebrews. So again, Diodorus Siculus, another quote from famous historian Aeneas in his, quote, when Troy was taken, Aeneas, together with some other Trojans, seized a part of the city and held off the attackers. And when the Greeks let them depart under a truce and agreed with them that each man might take with him as many of his possessions as he could, all the rest took silver or gold, or some other costly article, whereas Aeneas lifted upon his shoulders his father, who was now grown quite old, and bore him away. For this deed he won the admiration of the Greeks, and was again given permission to choose out what he would of his household possessions. And when he bore off the household gods, all the more was his virtue approved, receiving the plaudits even of his enemies. For the man showed that in the midst of the greatest perils his first concern was piety toward parents and reverence for the gods. And this was the reason, we are told, why he, together with the Trojans who still survived, was allowed to leave the Troad in complete safety and to go to whatever land he wished. That's where Rome came from, a land of law and order that was corrupted with paganism. Once again, like always happens when the Jews rise up above us, and all those Deuteronomy 28 curses apply to whites, etc.
But hang on, Dustin, and I say this, I put it up into the nest, and I've been trying to kind of pull out people's comments from the Purple Pill and put them up where it makes sense. Somebody just stated that we're diverging away from the conversation at hand, and so I'm just curious if the use of kind of these pieces is this to try and just extrapolate what happened to these individuals after
these
are the Bible, or
these are direct cousins and relatives of the white Israelites who became the white Trojans, the white Romans, etc. And they were this and other historians and others. We're in the anthropology and archaeology section right now, so we're going through historic sources outside of the Bible to confirm. And again, Diodorus Siculus and pretty much every other honest historian from that time period will confirm this. The Declaration of Arbroath, proof the Scottish or Israelites from Greater Scythia, the heraldry of the tribes of Israel. If you actually go and pull up the charts of the coats of medieval Europe, the heraldry of the tribes of Israel, with the actual symbols that they used, etc., then you'll see things like the real Judahites, the real Jews, actually the word was Yahudim, the word Jew was made up later. The real Yahudim, the Judahites of Judah, like Jesus, became the Irish people. And the coat of arms basically all sync up and match. And you can see how those symbols spread across Europe. And that's easy. Anyone can go confirm that with a couple pictures and symbols. It only takes a few seconds for you to see all of the similarities where different families would take that symbol and make it their own, show that they were a clan from that. And you see it in the early Irish surnames as well, in their personal coat of arms. That's basically some of the examples. I don't want to take too long on anthropology, for example, and the archaeology. We can go into some of the ancient stone that can prove that they were white, for example. Anyway, I don't want to take too long on it. I'm happy to dive deeper in any of these particular topics, especially genetics, because Ron had mentioned that. I would like to get his position again.
Well, for sure, and let's pass it back over to Ron. And just out of curiosity, Ron, is there anything in what Dustin just presented that you find inaccurate or incorrect, and if so, please let us know what it is, and if not, if you want to provide kind of your take on where you think, it's similar, or seemingly it is that the people from the Bible, that they basically either morphed into the Bantus or something along those lines. So I assume that's where you believe those people went and then stayed, if that's correct.
And I forgot to mention the Hebrew for father is Abba. You know, I mentioned all those others: father, vater, padre, pater, pitar, Abba. So that's where you get things like Papa.
And not to be confused with Alba as in Dancing Queen, for what it's worth.
Oh,
a little levity.
Gosh, yeah. I don't even. I can't keep up with all that anymore.
Can I just ask real quick while you're there, what is that symbol, Dustin? The symbol you were saying that the Irish clan, the triskelion?
Let me pull that section back up. It's, if you go to that post that's in one of the first things that we put up at the top, I think it is the first one, I have that thread, and you go to the post, Black Hebrew Israelites Debunked, you'll find the section Archaeology, and if anybody wants to follow along with that, so let me go back down. I'm sorry, Heraldry. That's the Heraldry section. And I'm going to pull it up so I can see. And I don't necessarily know the name of all the symbols, but Heraldry is kind of it's an art. It's of its own, basically. But if you go and look, and I use the example of the tribe of Judah, the red background, the red shield with the white lion. And Zerah was kind of the inverse of that. It was the white shield with the red lion, and it was the white shield with the red hand. So there's different symbols here, but the tribe of Judah also carry the line of kings. So you would also see things like the harp of David. That was a symbol for the royal line of Judah. So you see in Ireland, the harp. You see in places like Ireland and Scotland, all over the place, that lion under various, and in fact, it's not just Ireland. It's Normandy. It's England. It's Denmark. It's Norway. It's Sweden. It's all over the Western European lost tribes of Israel, because there was intermixture, etc.
This Lion of Judah. Yeah. The triskelion is that it's three, and it's the spirals, the three spirals, and I've seen it in Egyptian iconography used as well, and Hebrew, whatever we're deciding that is. But I'll leave it at that for now, anyway.
Yeah, is Ronald, are you back?
Yeah, so if I can just talk now, a lot of what he said is, oh man, so much stuff is incorrect. I mean, we know that the totem of the symbol for Judah is a lion. The lion, I mean, you can say it's a lion of it's the Barbary lion, and you know.
Ian, are you making room for speakers at all?
We will in probably about 30 minutes. We'll open it up for a Q&A. We're going to let Ronald go back and forth here. He's got a segment that he wants to cover, and then we'll probably do some kind of closing remarks or closing arguments as if it's a courtroom, and then we'll open it up to questions for those that might have them. And in that time, we'll put up a poll for everybody to vote in terms of who they think had the more compelling argument. It's not defeating the other person. It's merely a presentation of ideas, but we'll build that in there.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things wrong. Land of Canaan is not Europe. The Bible mentions hyena, ostrich, jackal, dog, wolf, all in the same chapter, and we know that ostriches is not in Europe. Hyenas are not in Europe. Wolves, I mean, you're not going to see wolves, hyenas, dogs, and jackals all in Europe. You'll see that in Africa. You're not going to see lions and leopards in Europe, because you're going to see it in Africa. Whether you want to call it monocorous, whether it was one horn or two horns, we know what a rhinoceros is, and these are in Africa. Same thing with a camel. Camelopardus is the Greek word for camel. This is in the Greek Septuagint in terms of the animals that the Israelites can eat when they go to the land of Canaan. There's so many things in the Bible that lets us know that the land of Canaan is not Europe. Europe is Asia and Africa is the land with the most mountains, and we look at the rifts. There's so many different rifts you see in Africa. Rifts usually accompany mountains and valleys. These rifts are in Africa. There's more mountains in Africa than there are in Europe. And when you look at the amount of lakes and rivers that are in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa is by far more of a well-watered place than you see in Europe. And of course, in Africa, you can harvest 3 times a year. You can harvest just like the 3 feast days. In Europe, because it's cold, you're not going to get 3 harvests out of a year because it's a colder climate. But anyway, let me go to the language, because Dustin failed to show us any Hebrew traditions and customs that lingered along amongst the European people that he claims are the Jews, when they're really descendants of Germanic people. And when you look at, let's go to the Temne tribe in Sierra Leone. And mind you, the Temne tribe in Sierra Leone was colonized by the British. And why are these tribes? And I know some people in the Temne tribe. And I asked them on Clubhouse, I said, well, how do you say chief? Chief in your language, you say rabbi. How do you say Jew? Yehudi. How do you say Israel? Israel. How do you say teacher? Mori. How do you say good news? Basara. In Hebrew is Basara. How do you say me? Ami. In Hebrew is Ani. How do you say so be it? Is Ami or Amina or like an amen. How do you say to bless? They say Bakar. In Hebrew is Barak. How do you say I or eyeless? They say ayin. In Hebrew is ayin with an A, and they spell it with an E. How do you say Egypt in your language? They say Mizra or Mizri. In Hebrew is Mizraim. How do you say prophet in your language? They say Nabi. In Hebrew is Nabi. How do you say creator in your language? They say Yehovah. And in Hebrew is Yahuwah or Yahweh. How do you say father? They say Oka. In Hebrew is Abba. How do you say messenger or angel? They say Malaika. In Hebrew is Malak. How do you say Sabbath or rest? They say Sabbat. In Hebrew is Shabbat. How do you say spirit? They say Ruhu. In Hebrew is Ruach. How do you say weeping? They say Baki. In Hebrew is Beki. And so let's go to another go to another language. In the Ebe language in Togo, you say, how do you say, the Bible talks about the word Adam and Eve. How do you say Adam? They say Adim. What does Adim mean, the every person in Ghana, Togo? It means you resemble me, meaning that Adam or Adam was the first man and he was made in God's image. He resembles God. Okay, how do you say, the story of Adam and Eve? How do you say Eve, like the English word Eve in the Ewe language? They say Hawa or Hawa. With the kawa. I said, okay, kawa. What does that mean? It means made from side or made from the rib. That's what it means in the Ewe language in Ghana, Togo. Oh, well, in Hebrew Strong's 2332, we see the word kawa means Eve, but it means is Hawa in Hebrew. Okay, let's go to another language. Let's go to the Congo language. So the word El means a god or a spiritual entity in Hebrew. In the Kikongo language is Ele. In the Kikongo language, they say Ilimo. In the Hebrew Strong's is H430 Elohim. That's the word for entity or God. How do you say laugh in Kikongo? It's Tasaka. In Hebrew, it's Tasaka. Hebrew Strong 66711. Let's keep going. So when you go and look at the Hebrew Strong, sorry, if you go to Hebrew Strong's, to be small, it's Kala. In Kikongo is Kulula, Hebrew Strong 7043. Hebrew Strong's 3213 means to scream, to moan, to make a howl. In Hebrew, it's Yaulau. In Kikongo, it's Yawala. In Hebrew, the word do or to realize to do means asa in Hebrew, Hebrew Strong 6213. In Kikongo, it's sa. To correspond, to receive from one another. In Hebrew, Strong 69001 is cabal. In Kikongo, is Kabbalah. Let's keep going. This is Hebrew seen in the Bantu languages. To say harden in Hebrew is Kazakh. In that's Hebrew Strong's 2388. In Kikongo, in Central Africa, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is Kasuka. To say a day of rest or prayer, you say Saba or Samba in Kikongo. In Hebrew is Shabbat. When you want to say abundance, in Hebrew Strong 7647, it's Saba. In Kikongo, it's Saba. To say to change or to invert, Hebrew Strong 7725 is Shub. In Kikongo, is Shuba. To issue a decree or like a governor, Hebrew Strong's H2710 is kakak. In the Kikongo language, it's kakak. Exactly the same thing. If you want to say to rest, then the Hebrew word is Noach. Noah's name means to rest. And when you look at, it's also a word means to rest. And the Kikongo word is Nuka. Noach, Nuka. When you look at the word to choose or to seize. Hebrew Strong's H977 is Bakar. In Kikongo is Baka. Let's keep going. In the Kikongo Bantu language of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Esau is H6215. In Kikongo is Nsavu. The word water, Hebrew Strong's 4325. In Hebrew is Mayim. In Kikongo is Mayi. The word son in Hebrew Strong's 1121 is Ben. In Kikongo, it's Bana or Ben. When you look at the word, what could be Ba or Bar. If you look at the word, let's look at reddish, like Adam. In the Kikongo, it's Ndu. When you look at the word over here, let's go to another one. Let's look at the word to screen or to. I think I already did that. Let's go to another one because I mean I got so many, it's ridiculous. If you want to go to the word to shine or bright, or a flaming, blazing, something bright, then you can look at the Hebrew Strong's word Shekinah, like Shekinah glory, and in the Kikongo it's Sikana. It's Sikana. Now let me go to some Egyptian words before I do. I'm gonna give you one last word in the Ewe tongue. In the Ewe tongue, you know the word Canaan. In the Ewe tongue is Canaan. What does Canaan mean in the Ewe tongue in Ghana talk? It means the soil provides, or the soil is fruitful. In Swahili, Canaan means that which is abundant. That which is abundant. The land of Canaan was an abundant land. The word Sinai, Mount Sinai, in the Ewe tongue. How do they say that in the Ewe tongue? They say Sinai, Csinay. It means to escape there. The Hebrews escaped Egypt and they landed. Their first spot was in Mount Sinai. What else do they say? Because Hebrew is polysemic, so the same consonants can have a different meaning. So the word, just like the word Sair, has different meanings. It can mean hairy, it can mean cave dweller, it can mean demon, it can mean a fawn or a goat. The word Senay, Senay, means law given to me, or law given there. Senay, means law giving season. Senaya, Senaya, means the law give life. If you know that the Hebrew Israelites, the Torah was basically the law of their life. That's what they had to go by at the end of the day. When you look at the Bible, let me just give a because I know we don't have a lot of time for Q&A. When we look at the Celtic languages, we look at the English language, which is a component of French, Germanic, Latin, and Greek. We look at the Germanic language, the Slavic language, the Greek language, the Italic Roman language, Romance languages. Look at the Tocharian language and the Indo-Iranian and the Indo-Aryan languages, including the Turkic languages and the Sino-Tibetan languages, the Japanese languages, the Altai languages. We see that all of these languages are not Shemitic. They don't have any Shemitic in them at all. They're not Hamitic. They don't have any African dialects in their language. So the Hebrews would have had to have came out of Egypt after being there for hundreds of years. They had to come out of there at least having some knowledge of the language that the people that were ruling over them had set in place. After all, if you're living in a land that the majority ruling people are the Egyptians, then after being there for 200 years and you're marrying with the Egyptian women, like Joseph married the daughter of Potiphar, he had Ephraim and Manasseh. King Solomon was given the daughter of his wife, the queen, as a dowry gift. So King Solomon had children with an Egyptian woman, and we see that Joseph did as well. So when we look at these things, we have to ask ourselves, okay, so then if the Hebrews were living amongst the Egyptians, they were also learning their language, so that if you have a mother that's Irish and a mother that's an Arab in the household, your son is going to learn Arabic and the Irish language. Just as somebody was a half Chinese and half American, they would learn Chinese from their mother or father, and then American from their other mother or father, depending on who's Chinese and who's American. So when you look at the Israelites, when they left Egypt, they had to be knowledgeable in the language of the Egyptians and the Hebrews. And we see this in the Bantu people today, including the Ethiopians. So when we look at the Ethiopians, we see examples of a Semitic language, which we know that the Amhara and these other languages, Tigrini, as we know that these are Semitic languages. Nobody can deny that. We can see this in the language. You can actually Google and study all the languages the Ethiopians have. But let's go to the Igbo language. The Igbo language, the word ku in the Igbo language is bu, and it means to die or to kill. The word bi in the Egyptian language is in the Igbo language bu. It means to become. The word fe in the Egyptian language means to fly away or to go. The same word in the Igbo language, fe. The word aru or wu in the Igbo language is anu and ku. It means to rise. The word hu, with the H-O-O in the Igbo language is gu. It means to dance and to rejoice. The word dor, D-O-R, in the Egyptian language, and in the Igbo language is nor. It means to sit down, to settle. In the Egyptian language, you'll see, even in the Hebrew, you'll see amu or amo, and in the Egyptian language is umu. The word ka is similar to like a spirit or greater or higher or deity. In the Igbo language is also ka. Ani in the Egyptian language means land below, in the Igbo language means land below. In the Egyptian language, you see the word it means me, in Igbo it means inside or among. Let's look at the Amhara or Amharic languages. You see that in Egypt, when you say the ancestor or father or forefather, you say Abut. In Amharic or the Amigna or Ethiopic Tigrina, you see Abba. Stop is Abu. In the Ethiopic is Abara, father. Ab. In Amharic is Ab, Abba, Abat, Abu. To cease or to forget in Egyptian is Abak. In Ethiopic is Abakla. To mix or to ferment, like a drink, Abek. In Amharic is Aboka. To clap, Abink. In Amharic is Abak. Greedy, gluttonous, Afa. In Amharic, Ethiopian, Hafur. To burn, to make hot, to boil, Afur. In the Amharic, Ethiopian, Afala. To rest or die, Arf and Arafa is in Ethiopic. To delay or to wait, Asa in Amharic, Asayo. Asayo. You look at the word dog or jackal is Ash, in Amharic is Washa. Look at the word to noose or to give drink or to nurse is Atit, in Amharic is Atata. You look at the word to yoke a beast is Atar, in Amharic is Ator. You look at the word house is Beit or Abit, in Amharic is Bit. You look at sheep is Ba, in Amharic Bag. To shine, to illuminate, to give light. Also in Egyptian can you say Barga, in Amharic is Barakaraga. When you look at the Swahili, let's go to Swahili. The word is
Ronald, I'd be curious across Swahili and perhaps you could just state some of the other languages where there's similarities. But I'm sure you've got countless examples, and I don't mean to undermine those or discount the value of them. I think we can just take it at face value that there's a whole lot of similarities there, just in the interest of time for everybody.
Praise
okay.
God.
So we'll just stop with that one. But here's the thing I wanted to point out. When you look at the history of Europe, with the Celtic tribes, with the Germanic tribes, with Germania, with the Slavic tribes, with the Turkic tribes, we have to understand that at some period of time that Rome did fall, and Rome did fall to Germanic tribes like the Saxons, the Angles, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Visigoths, the Suevi, the Lombards, the Burgundians, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths, and all these different Eastern Germanic, Northern Germanic, and Central Germanic tribes that they basically took over the Western and Eastern Roman Empire. And this is the reason why today we see that in the British Isles, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, United Kingdom, you're looking at Western Eastern Europe, Spain and Portugal. With Spain and Portugal, when you look at the Kingdom of Brazil, before that was the Kingdom of Portugal. Before that, the Kingdom of Portugal was connected to the House of Burgundy. The House of Burgundy is one of the Eastern Gothic languages, including Visigothic and Ostrogothic, and then you have Gothic, and from Gothic you also have the Burgundic languages and the Vandalic languages. So the Vandals, the Burgundians, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, these are all descendants of Germanic people. If you look at the history of Germanic people, and from Asian sources and Turkic sources and even Greco-Roman sources, they always kind of tied in the children of the Germanic people and the Slavic people to the children of the other children of Japhet, like the children of Magog, children of Meshach, children of Tubal, just some people living in the Slavic lands in Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, that say that they came from the descendants of Tyrus, and their ancestry goes back to across the Carpathian Mountains that stretch along Romania, Ukraine, and Poland. And so these are people that actually tell you they're descendants of Tyrus. The Armenians say that they're descendants of Togarmah. You'll see that in the case of our correspondence and the other things in Central Asian, Chinese Tang Dynasty texts and Uyghur texts and Mongolic texts, you'll see how they ran into, and even the Romans and the Greeks even mention these Germanic tribes or these Gothic tribes that conquered the old Roman Empire. That the Greco-Romans, they were considered the civilized tribes, and everybody else on the other side to the north were barbarians. And so you see this connection with barbarians and Scythians and Germanic people and Slavic people. And so when we look at these nations today, all these tongues, whether it's the Turkic tongues in Central Asia, whether it's the Mongolic tongues, the Sino-Tibetan languages in China, the Altaic languages here in Japan, and all these other tongues in Europe, they are all Japhetic languages. They are not Shemitic at all. So it tells you that they are not Shemitic people, because the Shemitic languages are within the languages of the ancient Assyrians, the ancient Babylonians, the ancient Elamites, the ancient Arameans, the ancient Syrians, or the Mitanni Empire. And this is simply not the case when you look at the European people's languages. You do see Afro-Asiatic languages in Africa, and although the guy, whatever his name, Greenspan, whatever his name is, that classified all these languages as Nitro-Congo and Nitro-Cordofanian, wanted to give the Bantu languages their just due diligence and labeled them Afro-Asiatic languages, because these Afro-Asiatic languages not only is confined to Ethiopia and the house was in the Tuareg, but also it's confined to sub-Saharan Africa as evidence of the Hebrew and the Egyptian and the Bantu languages, which are just demonstrated today. So the claim that the land of Canaan is Europe and Europeans are the true Israelites, when you go back to the DNA, like I said once again, you can't say that you're a descendant of Israel and you don't have any maternal DNA that's seen in ancient Egypt, like L3E, L3F, L2, L0A2, L4, L5. You don't see it there. In the paternal DNA of the Egyptians that we see in Somaliland, in East Africa, in African Great Lakes. I can name off the haplogroups. When the Israelites left, they left as a mixed multitude. What does that mean? It means that in addition to the Israelites that left with Moses, they also left with people that had been mixing with their daughters and sons for a long time. This is seen in Judges chapter 3, also in Ezra chapter 9, how it talks about how the Israelites were mixing with the Canaanites and other nations from the time of the Judges, the time of Book of Judges and King Saul, 1300 BC, all the way to the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, around 500 to 600 BC. So we have to understand that from the time of the Exodus, even prior to the Exodus, when they were in the land of Canaan, Abraham dwelled in the land of Canaan, and the 12 sons of Jacob left the land of Canaan to go into Egypt. So they already had a language, they already had a culture. Their language was not Egyptian. The language was Hebrew, and Hebrew phonation is basically identical to each other if you really look at the script. And I can even go to the ancient Phoenician Canaanite language and similarities in the ancient language of the African Pygmy in sub-Saharan Africa. This is in the movie Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, that shows you how the ancient Malawi Sapitwa priests that are the African pygmies there, they call them the Akafula, or the honey collectors, or the short people, that they still can write down their ancient script on sand, and they can give you the pronunciation for each script or symbol that they give you, and this is exactly what you see in ancient Hebrew or Phoenician or the Canaanite Ugaritic languages. So when you look at the DNA of the ancient Hebrews, it should show the DNA on the maternal side of Cushites, of Egyptians, and black Canaanites, because the Canaanites were not white, and then the Cushites and the Egyptians were black, and the Puthites were black. It makes no sense to have four sons and one of them was white, the rest are jet black, and they are Negroid in appearance, and they have woolly hair. We know that the ancient Canaanites were not the Lebanese people, these Ottoman Turks. We know that the ancient Canaanites were not Palestinians. We know that the ancient Canaanites are not Jews. We know that the ancient Canaanites are not white people. The ancient Canaanites were black people. And black people, just like the Israelites, they resembled each other. This is the reason why, when you look at the descendants of Ishmael, the true Arabs, they don't describe themselves as the color for white. They describe themselves as Azwa, which is black. Aswad, which is black in Arabic. And when you go to North Sudan and they speak their mother tongue Arabic, who do you see in North Sudan? Black Arabs. What Arab caliphates came into Egypt and Sudan and took over according to the history? It was the earliest caliphates like the Umayyad and the Abbasid and the Fatimid caliphates that came when the birth of Islam came, and these black Arabs are the true possessors of the ancient Y-DNA J304 and the Y-DNA J1C and J1E. And if you go down to Socotra, which is a part of Yemen, it's a little island off the coast of Yemen, you'll see that the haplogroup N and the ancient haplogroup, the father haplogroup of J304, is seen in the people of Socotra. And when you Google the people of Socotra, you don't see a group of white people or white Arabs, you see black people, black-looking Arabs. Just like the black people in Yemen that look like light-skinned black people. Why do they look like light-skinned black people in Yemen? Because there's more African or more Ishmaelitic or Egyptian DNA mixed with Shemitic DNA in their people than it is your typical white-skinned Arab in Lebanon or Iraq or Palestine. Go on to Yemen and you'll see that they look like light-skinned black people. So this shows you that the African connection came from somewhere. And so we know that their maternal DNA is going to show, of course, the DNA of the Greeks and Europeans and other nations, but it's also going to show a branch called L6. And where do you get L6 from? You get it from the other L haplogroup families like L0, L1, L2, L3, L4, L5, and even the oldest haplogroup, L7, which is seen by the Hotspur people in Tanzania. And so we have to look at these people that were already in sub-Saharan Africa before the Bantu people got there from the north, like the Khoisan Bushmen and the African Pygmies that were all throughout Africa. Who are these black people that were down in this area living in multiple clans and tribes? Like the Biaka, the Bakola, the Efe, and all these different tribes, these little black people, they call them different names. But we have to look at the fact that the ancient DNA studies inside rock shelters in Zambia, in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in South Africa, in Cameroon, in Congo, shows that their DNA, Y-DNA, B2B, and the maternal DNA, L0A2, L1C, L2, L2A, has been found in these caves dating back to 3,000, 4,000 BC, before Abraham even existed. So when Abraham came to the land of Canaan, when he left Egypt and went south, he dwelt in the land of the Canaanites. He said, the Canaanites are also here where I dwell. And these Canaanites were subjected to forced labor and servitude by the Israelites. And the Israelites were told to possess the land and dispossess the Canaanites, and to maybe to not make marriages with them, but they still did make marriages with them because it's still in the Bible. It says even to this day, there's Canaanites that weren't driven out of the land, and they dwelled with the Israelites until this day. And we know in scriptures that they did mix with the Canaanites for thousands of years, just like they did with the Egyptians. And so therefore, we should see the DNA of these black races in the true Israelites on the maternal side, and in some cases on the Y DNA side. But in the Y DNA side, the Bantu people's main Y DNA type in sub-Saharan Africa is one DNA type, E1B1A. This means that they all have a common ancestral forefather dating back to Jacob. And why do I say it's Jacob? Because their oral history states that they left Egypt and they crossed the river of reeds, which in the Hebrew is Yam Suf, where the word Yam can mean a large body of water, like a large river, a large lake, or a large sea. And the word Suf means reeds. No reeds grows along saltwater bodies or banks like the Red Sea, the Dead Sea, the Atlantic Ocean, because reeds grows along freshwater banks like the Nile River, like the Congo River. So when Moses was put in a reed basket, it's because there were reeds growing all along the Nile River. So when you say the river of reeds, which is Yam Suf, it's not Yam Adam. Yam Adam is the Red Sea, because Adam means red. That is not in the Hebrew text. In the Hebrew text, it says Yam Suf. Suf means reeds. We know what reeds are because you can make a reed basket by going to the Nile River and picking out some reeds. So when they say they left Egypt from the north and migrated south along the Nile River, and they crossed the Nile River, not the Red Sea, and then they scattered in amongst different parts of Africa. This was why when they got into Africa, they ran to a place that was full of mountains, hills, valleys, lakes, springs, streams that flow into valleys, and torrents. Torrents is basically a waterfall where water rushes rapidly and it starts to confine in a short segment of space, like between two short areas like Murchison Falls in Uganda, and you have a powerful stream or a rapid that falls down into a waterfall. So all of these things basically is all seen in Africa. And when you talk about the mountains of Lebanon, Lebanon in the Arabic means white mountains because Lebanon means white. Well, where can we find the most mountains with snow at the top? You see it in Africa. One mountain in Israel, her mountain does not count. And we have to look at all of these things and understand that when the Bible says in Psalms 125, 1 through 2, that Jerusalem is encircled by mountains. The Hebrew word for that is shabib, and it means to encircle around all sides. Well, if you look at the different belts, mountain belts that are around the African Great Lakes surrounding Lake Victoria, there's mountains on the topographical map of Africa that are fashioned in a complete circle spanning Kenya, Uganda, Congo, Zambia, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. And within these rifts and cratons and mountain belts, you're also going to have valleys. And what are you going to see in these valleys? You're going to see lakes and rivers and streams within these valleys, exactly what the Bible says. So at the end of the day, when the Israelites say they migrated south into Africa and wandered in different locations, ultimately ending up in the Central African region or the African Great Lakes region. And then after a period of time, you had the Bantu expansion. It's because when they were in the kingdom of the Congo, where I just read off about 10 to 20 words that are identical to Hebrew, and I got 100 more, 100 or 200 more, then I'm showing you that the core place of the Bantu people at one point in time was the kingdom of the Congo, which had 12 kingdoms ruled by one clan. And the clan was called Akanda, and the people of the Kanda was called Wakanda or Bakanda. And so when you look at the kingdom of the Congo, we know the Catholic Church and the Portuguese, they had to immediately rush into the Congo during the Congo basing, aka the Berlin Conference, to shut down, to steal, to erase, to take away so many things that could connect the kingdom of the Congo and the Bantu people to the Israelites, even neglecting the fact that Proto-Sinaitic Hebrew was found inside the Lobo Massif caves and other rock cave structures in the Congo dating back to the time of the Hebrew script that was used by Moses. And the Congo people say that they even have evidence of the Ark of the Covenant, but when slavery happened, there's some things that got hidden, and they didn't tell people certain things. So people can run around looking for the Ark of the Covenant and think it's in Ethiopia, they think it's in Mount Kenya, they think it's in Melanesia, they think it's in Papua Guinea, they think it's in the Congo. But the Israelites made sure that sometimes they made replicas so that the children of the red cloth or the Freemasons or the wicked people cannot find the true source of the Nile, the Ark of the Covenant, and the true Israelites and the true location of Jerusalem, because that is where the true kingdom of Judah is at, is in Jerusalem. And Mount Zion is a high mountain. It says this in the Bible. And where we have the highest mountains in terms of surface area and height, you see it in the mountains of the moon, with Mount Rwenzori in the Congo, which spans from the Congo to Uganda. And that's just one of the mountains that circles the African Great Lakes region.
That's a perfect place to bring this up. And Dustin, I see you got your hand up. I want to make sure we go back to you. And what we'll do is, Dustin, I'm going to give you some time to either rebut or challenge any of the statements that were made there, and then we'll do some closing remarks from each of you to kind of just serve us the overarching thesis conclusion. But first, let's go to Extra, who I know has his hand up, and bring him in here.
Well, thanks, and I'll be really quick. Can you just mute your mic there for a second, Ronald? Thanks. As I said before, and look, I'm only co-hosting here, but from my perspective, I'm just wondering whether a lot of people have heard all of this and are just really eager to ask a question, get a quick answer. What I'll say is that for future debates, I would like to see people never go into an exhaustive list of every word possible. We can take it as read that you've supported your argument if what you're trying to make the case is that the languages that you're saying are the ones that the Bantu uses, or even other African tribes, have much similarities with Hebrew. So we'll just take it as read. No need to exhaustively go through everything. And also, don't repeat the same points, because I did hear you say things like, well, and I know I've been there, Pretoria does have some lakes and it is quite high elevation. But that's Africa is a vast territory, and that's very different from saying that the Great Lakes then up at Victoria Falls, that's quite a good distance from there. So you're conflating a lot of things, and that doesn't do much good for your argument there. Pick a place and say that's what it is, if you like. Anyway, I would just encourage both of you, and I'm not here to debate you, I'd encourage both of you to be brief, because then you'll give a much more chance for the people now who are eagerly waiting to ask you questions, and I think that's going to be a lot more exciting for them to be engaging with you and to get brief answers from you to the point. I'll say one last thing. I totally accept, and it's very interesting, things like yam stuff, that literally means the sea of reeds, and or reed sea, and that it could be very easy for somebody to then say, oh, Red Sea by accident, and that's probably why it's a misnomer. That it's not really red at all. So that is very interesting. You know, so things like that you could just bring out, and you know, we'd hear about that, just little bite-sized things. That would be fascinating. I'll leave it at that for now, and back to Ian.
A great point there, Extra, and perhaps maybe let's do something a little bit unorthodox. So I said we're going to do closing remarks, but prior to that, what I'd actually like to do, and this might add a little bit of spice, which somebody in the comments in the Purple Pill was requesting. What I'd be interested in is, before the closing remarks, which I want to be based on what you believe, not attacks on the other person's position. But before we get to the closing remarks, I would like to offer an opportunity for each of you to perhaps highlight the things that you think were said by the other person that you think are the most able to easily be either discounted or disproven. And it could be one item that you feel like, hey, I'm going to hyper-focus on this thing and I'm going to dismantle it because I feel like it undermines the other person's position. Or it could be a list of things that you think are inaccuracies. You can use, let's call it 3 to 5 minutes as you see fit. But there's been a lot that has been said. I think for some of the folks listening, myself included in this, some of these points might have flown over our head, but like Extra just said, when focusing on some of the bigger picture items, I think there have been some pretty convincing pieces. But I would be interested in each of you to offer just maybe, like I said, 60 to 180 seconds and highlight some either a thing or a few things that you think are just either most easily disproven or that you think are maybe the shakiest of arguments. And then what we'll do after that is we'll allow everybody to just kind of offer their concluding statement. And as you guys are doing this, I'm going to build out a poll. I'm going to put it up into the nest so that everybody will be able to offer their thoughts, and we'll use that as an opportunity to then go into Q&A and bring up anybody that has questions for you. So let's just start with Dustin. And I do this because, Ronald was just speaking most recently, so it might be easier for him to do so. And so, Dustin, if you want to take just like I said, maybe 1, 3, 5 minutes at most, and just address maybe the points that you think are the most shaky or the easiest to disprove, and then we'll go to Ronald to do likewise for your positions. And like I said, we'll do a conclusion.
So after he just spoke for like 10, 15 minutes, I'm going to need a little bit more time to rebut some of those points. And then I'm happy to give you a 30-second closer on what you just asked for. I won't need that long, but I do have a lot to respond to here. So again, to remind people, I have refuted every single point Ronald has made so far. And in terms of the Bantu, customs, again, clearly whites taught Bantu some Hebrew customs. That certainly sounds like some overlap in the languages. I concede that point. But speaking Hebrew, or something that sounds like Hebrew, which is a number of languages, does not make you Hebrew. Speaking French does not make a black immigrant French any more than speaking Mandarin makes them Chinese or an orange. Almost every word he mentioned is as close in Arabic as it is in Bantu. There are many languages that sound, like I said, almost like Hebrew, word for word. And you said earlier, by the way, Ronald, quote, just because the white Arabs speak a Shemitic language doesn't make them from Shem, end quote. I agree with you, and I apply the same logic to black Bantus. Now, in terms of the languages, I want to just briefly mention, since we've been on the language topic so much, that there is a common origin to almost every language on Earth. Scholar and renowned linguist Charles Berlitz of Berlitz Language Schools spoke an amazing 32 languages, and like Sir William Jones, who we'll cover in a moment, his life's research in comparative linguistics led him to the inescapable conclusion that all the world's languages must trace back to a single lost ancient dialect. Berlitz actually wrote several books about Atlantis and believed the primary language of the race originated there. And I would agree with him. We know of this in the Bible as the Tower of Babel, where all the languages were split and we lost our original Thracian language. We've rediscovered it, though. Now we can prove that the oldest deciphered texts are not Sumerian, but the Thracians, which talked about Adam and Eve and God. Now, in 1780, Sir William Jones, a Supreme Court judge who could speak 30 languages, gave his third anniversary discourse to the Asiatic Society, where he declared that the similarities between Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, German, Celtic, Celtic, Persian languages could only be explained on the hypothesis that they all shared a common parentage. His contemporary, the German philosopher Hegel, compared the consequences of Jones' revelation to the discovery of a whole new world, and his groundbreaking work on this subject established him as the founder of comparative linguistics. Jones wrote that, quote, the Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and the forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident. So strong indeed that no philologer could examine them all three without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which perhaps no longer exists. There is a similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Gothic and the Celtic, though blended with a very different idiom, had the same origin with the Sanskrit, and the Old Persian might be added to the same family. And Max Muller says that the Semitic languages also are all varieties of one form of speech. That includes apparently Bantu, though we do not know that primitive language from which the Semitic dialects diverged, again because of the Tower of Babel. Yet we know that at one time such language must have existed. We cannot derive Hebrew from Sanskrit or Sanskrit from Hebrew, but we can well understand how both may have proceeded from one common source. Now, in terms of some of the other, there were many points to rebut. By focusing Ron's efforts on the customs adapted from Hebrew peoples in Bantu culture, it is to basically argue, like I said, that African immigrants to China are Chinese when they learn the language. So again, no matter how long you talk about those similarities or how many words you quote, they will never, ever, ever prove Bantus being Israeli, which comes from the biblical descriptions, the verses, the prophecies. It comes from God. It doesn't come from the Bantus' perspective of themselves. Not learning the language of the biblical chosen people doesn't make you the biblical chosen people. To Ronald's point about Bantu customs and traditions, again, this only proves me right. The actual Israelites were promised to forget most of their customs and traditions, so the Bantu cannot be them right there, according to Ronald's words. Now, in terms of the other point he brought up was animals, a lot of time on animals. So other than animals that were near Canaan, which was where they went to, across the Red Sea, not the Reed Sea. There's no such thing. And the Nile River is a river, not a sea. And they knew the names of the rivers nearby. So why would they name it Reed Sea if it's not named that, if it's really named the Nile? In fact, God's word says they crossed on foot. The Red Sea parted. Very specific. And this is borne out not only by God's word, but everything else, as we've covered. Now, other than the animals that are near the land of Canaan, by the way, or words that they learned from others, what evidence has Ronald really given us? Zero. Those animals are near Canaan. That is not evidence. Now, I also never claimed that Europe was Canaan, by the way. This is not our position. Ronald, I think, mentioned it is, but that's a mistake. I never claimed that Europe was Canaan. Europeans had conquered Canaan from the giants, the Jews, basically. The real Jews of today, they come from the giants, and they're not the Jews of the Bible. They're the Edomites pretending to be the Jews of the Bible, and they put the word Jew in 1,400 years later. Anyway, they lost that land. We lost that land, and we were promised a new and greater land. In fact, in Leviticus 26:18, after a period of punishment, America and the UK and Europe, right there by the math, exactly. So 1776 is in Leviticus 26:18. Now, in terms of where we get the one man who's white having a black son, that's because Ham was married to a Nephilim wife, Na-el-Tanauk, and she was of all flesh corrupted in the pre-flood world. Now, he gave us, through his sinful nature and his actions, through his wife's nephilisomes, or chromosomes, if you will, he gave us black through Cush, a first black man whose name means black. The word in Hebrew means black. And he gave us the Jews, the Canaanites, the cone-headed giants like Goliath. And the ancient Canaanites were not depicted as black, but as cone-headed Jews. Look at their features. They look like today's Jews with slightly more serpentine or elongated features. Go look up Hittite. Go look up Canaanite. Go look up Hivite, etc. Again, Egyptian women, there may have been some intermixing there, but Egyptian women had blue eyes. Now, as Ron mentioned, he does not understand haplogroups. Now, he pretends to, interestingly enough, but again, he does not know what he's talking about and is reading something. As we covered earlier, these disparate, decentralized African haplotype groups are 100% evidence in my favor against his claim. It debunks Black Hebrew Israelism, and he talks about DNA and haplotype groups, but I don't think he understands it still. So if he doesn't understand it, that's fine. The audience, I think, can follow along with this, and no offense, Ron. And Canaanites were never considered Israelites. Any mixed children, like I have mixed children, I have 4 children with an Asian wife from Taiwan, are considered mamzers. Israelites are, by biblical law, pure blood Israelites. Now, with that said, any child with a Canaanite, a Jew of today, is to be put off and discarded per Ezra. The prophet forced the people to get rid of those wives, to get rid of those kids, because they are demonic bloodline. Also, the prophecies even said to go so far as to say that the new Israel home would be northwest of Palestine. Let me explain. While the children of Israel did conquer and settle in the lands of Canaan across that Red Sea, it was prophesied that they would eventually have a new home. This home was to be to the north, to the northwest. Which countries are northwest of Palestine? They're all European. The verse is, behold, these shall come from far and low, these from the north and from the west, and these from the land of Sinim. Isaiah 49:12. Also, Jeremiah 3:18. In those days, the people of Judah will join the people of Israel, and together they will come from a northern land to the land I gave your ancestors as inheritance. Jeremiah 31:8. Not 3:18, it's confusing. See, I will bring them from the land of north and gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them will be the blind and the lame, expectant mothers and women in labor. A great throng will return. Now, that's just, one of the examples of specific prophecy is very specific. It really is incredibly specific. I have to say, God's word, that's what convinced me of which God was real. When I realized God was real, I looked into all of them, and only one can predict the future and has a 100% accurate history book. Now, I will basically ask before I close out here that I've got a few more things, but I'm close. I ask people to judge the quantity of the words versus the quality of the words. And a couple of quick points. First of all, Genesis says that the real Israelites would bless all the nations. Now, I don't think that Africans have any claim to that or any of the other prophecies. So I'll put that one in Ron's camp. So I'll ask him how Africans have blessed all the nations. And also, second question, and I'm kind of serious, I'm mostly joking, are you having someone killed over there?
I think, Dustin, you're referring to the noise in the background.
Or torture.
Which I picked up on the joke there, and I just want to make that clear for everybody. Certainly no calls for violence. There was some strange background noise, Ronald, and I say that with no, what's the right term? No judgments, but just playing along with the
unless
joke.
You are, and then we might judge a little bit.
Yes, yeah, we condemn all violence, but I think that was a joke. Tuesday, he's kidding with that.
I'm joking, but please, yeah, it's the real question was, in what way have Africans blessed?
Okay, the more blacks for Trump. I'm moving you down just because the endless emojis are really annoying. All right, so let's go back to Ronald, and I want to give him the same chance. So Dustin he had an opportunity to point out a couple areas where he feels like perhaps some of the points that you made that he feels there may be some either clarification or that they might not be all that accurate. I'm not making a statement that they are or are not. But what I would love for you to do, Ronald, is maybe to highlight a couple areas, take a few minutes, just highlight some areas where you feel like there might have been either errors or kind of misgivings within some of Dustin's takes. And then what we'll do is to go to Dustin for a final, let's call it 2-3 minute statement. Then we'll go back to you, Ron.
Yeah, no, it's okay. No, my son is autistic, so I have an autistic son. So if anybody has autistic children, they know that the kids make noise.
I apologize.
So yeah,
I covered that with my news. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, Dustin, it's he keeps saying the Egyptians were white, they were blue eyes and all sorts of stuff. But if you're living in the modern world, if you simply Google Tutmosis III mummy in Egypt, you'll see that he is not white with blue eyes. You look at a lot of the mummies, the wooden statues, the depictions of the mummies on the walls, you'll see that they are not white people. And we know that there's iconoclasm where they lighten up the images of the mummies, but we know that still to this day the Somalians have a direct connection to the ancient Egyptians that follows the language, the traditions, the customs, the dress, the DNA is connected to the Somalians, and they're black people, they're not white. So that's a cop out to try to disconnect the Hebrews to the ancient Egyptians, because at the end of the day, we have to understand that to be an Israelite, your father has to be Jacob. Jacob only had one daughter. When they went into Egypt with the 12 sons of Jacob, he only had one daughter. So who are the men of Israel supposed to have children with if they only have one daughter and Jacob have 4 wives? And so are they going to have sex with their mothers or stepmothers? Or are they going to have sex with Dinah, these men of Israel? No, they're going to have sex and make babies, but the women of the land. This is the reason why we see in the scripture that it says that the Israelites intermarried with the Canaanites and Egyptians and the Cushites. And Moses had a wife who was a Cushite, and Aaron got upset. Miriam, these people were upset, and he struck her with a white skin. But even then, you got look at these things, like even the story of Moses putting his hand in God's bosom. Said this is the final test. If they don't believe this, then I don't know what kind of miracles I'm going to keep showing the Israelites to believe. So Moses put his hand in God's bosom, and he took it out, and his hand was white as snow. It says this in the Bible. And then he put his hand back in God's bosom, and it returned back to the complexion of his normal flesh. So we know that the miracle was not be from a white skin turning white, because that wouldn't be no miracle. So whether the person is white skin and then it changes to an albino color, it's still not much of a miracle, because that's like saying that my skin was dark skin and now I took it out and it's a little bit lighter but still dark skin. There's no miracle in that. When you look at the history of the Egyptians mixing with the Israelites for over 100 years and then leaving with Moses, the mixed multitude. When you look at the DNA Tribes Digest January 1st, 2012, the Armana Dynasty, King Tut and family, it shows you that the STR markers that they did, the autosomal STR analysis, autosomal means everybody. It means all the chromosomes, the mother, the father, all the family trees, is testing to see who in the world has autosomal DNA on the both sides of the family that shows traces of their connection to the ancient Egyptian mummies in the Armana Dynasty period. And when they did this test, they found out that it wasn't the people in Egypt, the Arabs. It wasn't people in other areas like Israel or the Aegean Sea or the Mediterranean area. It was people in the Horn of Africa, in the African Great Lakes, Southern Africa, and tropical West Africa. This is exactly the territory where the Bantu people left Egypt and went south, bringing with them the DNA genetics within their autosomal DNA for over thousands of years. This shows proof they've been mixing with the ancient Egyptians. Even when you look at the history of the black Jews in Spain and Portugal, you have to understand that when they were kicked out of Spain and Portugal, that the Portuguese sent them to Spanish and Portuguese colonies like Cape Verde and also Sao Tome, Principe, Biako Island, places of that nature. When they did DNA studies of the people that were on these islands that were supposed to be descendants of banished Jews that refused to accept Christianity, whether they were adults or children, King John III of Portugal, he even wrote a letter, in John Ogilvy in his book writes down what he said. He said that these people that they sent to the Portuguese colonies are descendants of the Negroes, these Jews that they sold as slaves or captives to their colonies in the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of Senegal, Gambia, Cape Verde, also off the coast of the Bight of Biafra, and Nigeria. Lagos, Nigeria is Portuguese. Also, Elmina Castle was a Portuguese fort back in the day. Also, you have in Benin. So when you look at these people that are living in they're living in Sao Tome, Principe, Biako Island, Fernando Po, also Cape Verde. Even the people that were sent into the Portuguese colonies in Brazil, you'll see that their DNA connects back to E1B1A, which is the DNA of the Bantu people. So when we look at all these things, then we have to do some analysis and say, okay, at the end of the day, the Bantu people, their Y DNA is one, E1B1A. E1B1, which is the father of E1B1A, had some mutations that happened. So E1B1 had mutations, EV38, EV100, and EM329. EM329, also known as E1B1A2 or E1B1AC, has been isolated in Ethiopia, where the Blue Nile goes into Ethiopia. E1B1A or M2 is isolated in the Bantu people. So you see, back in the day, the ISOGG, the International Society of Genetics Genealogy, they classified the Ethiopians, Semitic Ethiopians, as E1B1A2 and E1B1AC, which they then got rid of and absorbed it into the E1B1B classification. But prior to that, it was E1B1A and E1B1A2, which was linked to the Bantu people and the Semitic Ethiopians in Ethiopia. So when you look at the haplogroups EP2, which is E1B1, you'll see that the majority of the people living today that still have this haplogroup are in Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania, the Congo, and they also have E1B1A. And when you look at the maternal DNA and the maternal side, it shows you that they do have evidence of mixing with the ancient Egyptians, the Cushites in South Sudan, also the African Pygmies in sub-Saharan Africa, and the Khoisan people. And this is just not some recent mixing that they had. Even the Lemba Jews that don't particularly mingle with any other people, they like to stay set apart. They too had over 25% of their maternal DNA is seen in African Pygmies. However, African Pygmies are not seen in South Africa. African Pygmies are not going to be seen all over the place in Zimbabwe. So how is it that the Lemba Jews, whose totem is the elephant, how come 25% of their maternal DNA that connects to the African Pygmies, and they've been there since the times of Pepi II, Pepi I, and other ancient Egyptian pharaohs from the early dynasties, that they accounted that they went into Central Africa and found little black people dwelling at the mountains of the moon, the land of trees and spirits, and all these different animals and beasts. And they knew that this was another race of black people, not Egyptians, not the Cushites, not the Putites. And even the Pygmies say that the other black races are to the north and they're taller than us. And so when you look at all these things, we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, who are the Canaanites today? If Canaan's brothers was the Cushites in South Sudan that are black, the Nilots like the Dinka, the Anahuac, the Shiluk, the Nuba, and their Y DNA is A3B2, and their DNA is still seen today and still seen in the ancient Napata, Kerma, Kadruka, Morodic, and Kingdom of Kush time areas that span the Mesolithic, Neolithic, Paleolithic, Bronze Age, Copper Age, Iron Age. If their DNA is still the same as ancient DNA studies in Sudan, meaning the black Nilots, they are the true Cushites. If the ancient Egyptians are still black, when you look at the mummies in Egypt, and their DNA L3E, L3F, E75, all these different T, all these different haplogroups that are not seen in Europeans on the mother side and the father side, okay, these are the two black nations. And we know the Putites are the ancient Libyans, the Tuareg people that have the Libyco-Berber languages in this dialect in the alphabet in their language, the black Tuaregs that became the Moors, known as the Moors. These are all black people indigenous to Africa before the white man came and started mixing their seed and lightening up North Africa with the white Arabs. So if we know that the three sons of Ham are black, then we have to assume that the Canaanites were also black, and they were on some demon seed that mixed with the Nephilim giants, because nowhere in the Bible does it say that Ham had a wife that was a Nephilim. It's nowhere in the Old Testament. So we have to understand that although there were giants in the Bible, the Khoisan and the African Pygmies say that in the ancient times they lived amongst giants, And when the Bantu people came from the north, they came organized and numerous, and they had iron weaponry, and they also knew how to forge iron because iron was in the rocks in the mountains of sub-Saharan Africa, which is a trait of the land of Canaan. And they helped them defeat and drive off and kill the giants in their land. This is a known fact. In the Nguni languages, the very word Zimbabwe, it tells the story of the giants that were living in that land, and even the story of Goliath. This is within the Bantu languages. You're not going to know this unless you're Bantu and you study this. So we have to truly look at everything and analyze what the Bantu people, the walking Bible, the walking history people are telling us. It's no coincidence that many tribes, whether they're Nilotic or whether they're Afro-Asiatic or Bantu, that they all say that they some of them say that they left, and they left with the Bantu people, and they migrated to the African Great Lakes, and they left with a leader named Musaiga. Musaiga had a magic stick, and he led them to Mount Elgon, and led them to here, and did this and did that. And this is how they are telling their story, even though it's been over thousands of years. And when they tell you that the land of milk and honey, the land of Canaan, is in sub-Saharan Africa, that this is the Holy Land, then we have to look at the word Jerusalem, because the word Yirah means God will provide. Yirah Salem, peace. God will provide peace. Jerusalem is a territory of peace. And Jerusalem, like in Psalms 125:1-2, is surrounded by mountains in all sides, like a circle. That is not the case in Israel. The topographical analysis of Israel shows that more than 90% of the land of Israel is less than 600 meters above sea level or below sea level. The two lakes, Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, are the lowest lakes in the world. But people ain't gonna tell you that. You got to do your research. And when you look at the mountains, many of the mountains in Israel are not really classified mountains according to British standards or Asian standards. They're more classified like hills. But when you look at the high mountains of Israel, like it says in Ezekiel 34:14, it says that Strong's 4791, the Hebrew word Moram, means high or height. Micah 4:1-8 says Zion is the highest of the mountains. First Enoch book, chapter 24, in the Ethiopic canon, it says that Mount Zion is the high mountain, the summit and the throne of God. It says also in Ezekiel 20:40, my holy mountain, the high mountain of Israel, declares the Lord. The entire house of Israel will worship me. This is Mount Zion. Go to Mount Zion, Israel. It's not a high mountain. However, I'm about to land. I'm about to land. This is the last thing I'm going to say. When you look at the belt, this is fact that you can look up yourself. When you look at the belt that you see in the African Great Lakes, you look at the Rwenzori belt, the Mozambique belt, the Usagaran belt, the Ubendian belt, the Kabaran belt, the Turkana, and all these different belts. These belts make up mountain ranges and rifts. And when you look at the topographical analysis of these belts and cratons and rifts, it forms a circle. It forms a circle, and this place that is surrounded and enclosed by mountains is a place of natural protection because of the mountains. And within the valleys that the mountains form flow rivers. The African Great Lakes are connected by many rivers. You can look it up. You can Google this. And lastly, the Bible says the last judgment is in the valley of Jehoshaphat. It says, in those days, at that time, when I restore Judah and Jerusalem from her captivity, I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat means God will judge. God will judge. This is the last judgment against the nations. It says, my inheritance, Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, slave trades, East Africa slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. And they divided up my land, the Berlin Conference, the Congo Basin Conference, the Scramble for Africa, dividing up the land of sub-Saharan Africa.
I don't have all night, guys.
Lastly, they cast lots for my people. They bartered a boy for a prostitute and sold a girl for wine to drink. This is a known fact that the Europeans bartered slaves for wine, for guns, for gunpowder, and they did this to the Bantu people.
Ronald, and they asked you to rebut me. They asked you to rebut me, and you had like 5 minutes. I think you've gone over it, brother. Please hurry up. I got shit to do.
Okay, so basically the overwhelming evidence is there that the Bantu people, the Israelites, and the Europeans are the children of Japhet, connected to the Germanic people that conquered the old Roman Empire. That's who you are. The Caucasian race is the race of Japhet. You are not Shemitic, you are not Hamitic, you are not Afro-Asiatic, Shemitic, and Hamitic, which the Bible says the Israelites should have in their DNA and in their language. So therefore, you just have to continue to go with the truth that you are descendants of Japhet. the nations of Gomer, Magog, Meshach, Tubal, Tyrus, Japheth, Kittim, and all these other nations.
Ian, I need you to keep equal time, buddy, and keep time.
Yeah, no. I think, look, Ronald did a nice job maybe rounding out his statement there, especially the latter half of that. So, Dustin, why don't we give you a chance to round out your thesis here? This will be kind of your closing remarks, and then what I'll do is I'll put up that post asking who they think came out on top of the debate, and then we'll go down to some of the hands for some questions here. So, kind of consider this the closing chapter, and I think Ronald got a nice little chance there. So now we'll do likewise with you.
Okay, so it won't take me very long. I just want to remind mods to keep equal time and to watch time, because we're at over 3 hours, and I do have to watch the little ones and take care of the wife and such. So that last section was, I believe, supposed to be a rebuttal of my points, but he actually rebutted 0 of my points. He just kept reading more lies and nonsense. First of all, the story of Miriam getting white skin disease or leprosy for her racism against Moses' black wife is another proof of my point. Moses had a leprous hand, which is white skin disease. Again, Ron does not understand scripture or leprosy. Moses' hand was cured from being leprous, not turned from black to white to back. Again, just like his sister, all genetic tests and evidences point exclusively and only to white Europeans. That Ron has admittedly does not understand. I don't know what he's reading from, but does not understand haplotypes, as we have covered this, and I will again in a second. Also, again, ancient Egyptians were blue-eyed people. Please note the image above that I have shared of the mummies from Egypt and the statues of whom they are depicted, or depicting them, and the statues have blue eyes, etc. And there's also, by the way, another one that I shared, which has 4 colors of man in it, which is depicting early Egyptian people alongside a European white or Israelite, a black Nubian, and an Asiatic or yellow-skinned Asian person. So even early Egyptians admit that early Egyptians were red-skinned, blue-eyed people, not black. Ronald does not understand historic anthropology. If African Israelites, the blessing of multitudinous seed given to Abraham, would show up with African haplotypes, A, B, and E1b being the majority of the world population, but this is again not the case. Yet groups descending from haplogroup F are found in 90% of the world's population and all Europeans, but almost exclusively outside of sub-Saharan Africans, the aforementioned Afro portion of R1b, J, and the T haplogroups. Native Americans, again, also Q, not part of this, so I just want to remind people, if we're in the haplogroups thing, that is another major debunk of the BHI. Like, BHI cannot invite Native Americans into this con because it's not supported by the genetics. Now, where the Bible says that Ham's wife was Nephilim was where it says all flesh was corrupted in Genesis, except for Noah's immediate bloodline family, of course, his wife, his 3 sons, but that does not include the women, the wives. Now, where did the wife come from? All flesh was corrupted. You're in a paradox that only has one answer to the riddle. Only Cush was black, by the way. The other sons were of different color. Mitzrayim, or Egyptus, was red skin, as we see from the depiction of Egyptians themselves above in the thing that I shared with the 4 different colors of man. For those who are on following up later, you can go to the article that I posted, and you can follow along with this yourself and see all the graphic evidences and such, my documentary, all of that. It's at theserapayan.com or hiddenhisstory.com will get you there. It's called The Black Hebrew Movement Destroyed. And I am fairly pleased with the results of tonight. I hope that you'll agree with me that they had nothing.
Well, in the spirit of keeping it all on the positive front, I think both of you presented some very compelling and interesting takes. There were certainly lots of comments from individuals down below. And the thing that I would say that we got the most of was individuals expressing interest in what you guys were sharing. And so it seems like it's a win all around in the sense that both of you got to present very, very differing opinions on these things. I think everybody that was listening got to learn a lot. As a matter of critique of, I suppose, myself and just of the 2 of you guys, I think some of the things that we talked about went pretty deep in the weeds, and so I think some of it maybe it would be almost as if we were debating, some kind of higher level math with individuals that hadn't quite passed algebra yet. So some of the genetics went over my head, but it was very compelling and interesting.
If I can add 10 seconds, I would just want to say that the takeaway tonight is that the Jews are not the people of the Old Testament, whatever else you figured out.
Now that is, so we find, again, we started with and we come back to common ground. What I'd love to do in the interest of time is 2 things. First, I'd love to go to Truth Teller and Extrapolations, get some of their thoughts on kind of the space in general, some of the takeaways that they might have found most interesting. Then we'll go to Tuesday, who helped to initially set in motion this entire space. I'd love some of her thoughts, and then we'll go through some of the hands that are up here. Because there are lots of folks that are requesting, I think we've got 5 in addition to the 10 or so people that are already up here looking to ask questions. We'll try and keep them pretty pointed and specific. If you do want to make a statement kind of about any of the points made by either Ronald or Dustin, feel free to, but let's just try to keep things pretty reined in terms of timing so that we can close this up maybe in the next 15 minutes or so, and everybody can go and watch the incoming election results that I'm sure they're interested to take part in. So truth and extrapolations, I figured first let's go to the two of you guys for thoughts, and maybe we'll start with Mr. Truth Teller.
Sure, thank you. And if you don't mind, I'd like to hear what some of the speakers have to say first and come around to me last, if that's okay. So I don't know, does extra want to go? Extra.
Well, also as well, I think that if there's any of the listeners who have been waiting patiently, I'll let them go ahead with some questions, and if there's time, you can come back to me. I'll have a few comments then as well.
Okay, perfect. Well, let's go to just to give everybody a heads up. We'll go Sade, then we'll go to Official Dre, then we're going to go to La Farmer. We'll go to the Goy Father, and then we'll go down to Mr. Doc Holiday, and then we'll go to some of the other people that have their hands up. So if you just kind of keep your spot in the order there, and we'll just kind of gentlemanly go through everybody, or gentle ladily, since we're starting with Sade. So Sade, would want to get your thoughts initially on how everything went and some of your takes.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, Ian, much respect.
Well, I apologize. Let me cycle you just because I cannot hear you. I don't know if everybody else can.
Yeah, she was talking, Ian.
Okay. Yeah, she was one of the first people up here, so I assume sometimes these spaces they have all kinds of glitches. But today I'm bringing you back up, and while I am, also I put up in the nest, the most recent post is the poll. So if you guys want to vote while we go through some of the final remarks here and questions, feel free to do so. And with that, today let's go to you.
Can you hear me now? Yes?
I sure can.
Okay, perfect. Ian, thank you so much. I thought we were not going to have this, but you kept your promise and you conducted this session with professionalism. So I have a lot of respect for you. So I appreciate you. Thank you for hosting the space. My second point is, I met Ron 2 years ago on Clubhouse, and I watched when ADL agents that are still here on X follow his spaces and then deplatform him, and then the Kyrie Irving thing happened. While I knew him, and I saw the reaction of the ADL and the Jewish agencies all over the world, and I'm like, why are they so afraid of Ron? What is he saying that other people are not saying? What special narrative does Ron have? So I bought his books, I read it, I watched his documentaries, and basically his presentation today, even though it seems very detailed for a lot of you, is exactly why they're censoring him. For some reason, they do not want you to know this. Okay? Ron is a very proper person. He doesn't, like you saw how he presented. But why so just keep on asking yourself. I've put in the purple pill, the different reactions from the ADL, from the American Jewish Committee, actually asking Amazon move his books and documentary. But, thank God the Amazon owner refused to remove it, which is a good thing. So you can still access his books and movies on Amazon. My next point is, now I'm going to go back to myself. So I am an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian, but my church and my history taught me that ancient Israelites mixed with our population 3,000 years ago. And we believe, as Ron indicated, that we have the Ark of the Covenant, so we believe we have the priesthood lineage. And not only that, we believe that Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had a son. And that was 3,000 years ago. Between 3,000 years ago and now, there has been over 200 Ethiopian Solomonic kings who are the descendants of King Solomon. You don't need to believe me. You can go on my bio. I have my Linktree links in which you'll find correspondence from people working in the B'nai B'rith, American government, British government, acknowledging that the Ethiopian emperor is indeed the descendant of King David. The problem is they acknowledged that prior to the creation of the state of Israel. After they created the state of Israel, they decided to erase this history, do not talk about it, and censor people like myself who are presenting it with genetics. My other point is, you know, Dustin
How many you got
said
there,
that.
sister?
No, hold on, Dustin. I arranged this meeting. Just give me the courtesy. I respected you. I'm almost done, okay? You claim that the Jews are Nephilim and they are not the Israelites. But, you know, people do not need to understand genetics specifically because Dustin clearly told you that the haplogroup of the white Caucasian Western Europeans is mostly haplogroup R. But he doesn't mention to you that the son of Israel's prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu's son, his haplogroup is also R. So is he going to tell us that white Caucasians are also descendants of Nephilim? Because his logic fails right there. How is it possible that the son of the Israeli prime minister shares the same haplogroup as? Okay, so my last point. You please allow me to. Okay. Ethiopians, we do follow Old Testament laws. Unlike Europeans or Romans or Greeks, we practice circumcision, we follow dietary laws, we have lots of fasting days, and we follow the Sabbath. Bob Marley knew about this history. Marcus Garvey knew about this history. Bob Marley sang about Ethiopia. That's why they call themselves the Rastafarians. Rastafari is the name of the Ethiopian emperor. So, you know, most of you who have been jamming to reggae music and to Bob Marley's music, little did you know that he was singing about censored Ethiopian history. Thank you, Ian.
To address your questions and also to rebut a few things, I want to ask people to focus, if possible, on questions rather than opinions in the time we have left. I'm going to go in about 10 minutes. But Tuesday is also mistaken, as is Ron, her mentor. This broken logic is an example. Kyrie Irving getting 1% as censored as me is not proof that Ronald is right, guys. Again, I've been banned from YouTube, Twitch, PayPal, Patreon, BB&T Bank, Venmo, Shopify, Twitter, CloutHub, Elon Musk's free speech Twitter, speaking at conservative conferences in DC and elsewhere, the MAGA invite parties at Mar-a-Lago, books, Spotify, at the Q Great Awakening movement, etc. Unlike blacks, Jews are actually related to Europeans because they come from Esau. So they would have some genetic similarities to Judahites of Jacob, Israel. So yeah, that would explain the overlap in genetic types. But also, again, Jews are very genetically different from both white people and Hebrew Israelites. And I love Bob Marley, but that's not evidence. I'm sorry. If anyone else has questions, I'm happy to try to fill them. Tuesday, thank you with respect. I appreciate you putting this on. It was a lot of fun.
I love that, Dustin. Let's go to Dre, and then we'll go down. I actually can't remember who was after Dre, but I remember I gave you orders.
It was me.
Lafana was after Dre, Ian.
Brother, official Dre is on you.
Dre, are you there?
He might be upset. He was looking forward to this. Dre, you with us?
Here, I'll move him down, and we'll go to the farmer. Thank you so much, Doc, for pointing that out.
Yeah, thank you for the space, as always. You a truth teller, and Extract, and everybody else on the stage, especially Brother Ron Dalton, as well as Dustin and Sister Sade, Brother Yahweh. Beautiful, beautiful space. I would just say this too, just to get straight to the point. I made 2 points that I put in the purple pill as well. I didn't know the rules to the Jumbotron. And you can check my chat to see if you can put them in the Jumbotron. But just
I'll put them in there for you right now, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the points that I made was the 400 years and the prophecy of the 400 years that is written in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 to 14. And it specifically points to the 400-year prophecy about slavery. When you do a Google search about the 400-year prophecy upon the people of the world, the only group that comes up with that 400 specifically is those who descended from the transatlantic slave trade. When you go ahead and look at the transatlantic slave trade, it is also etched in American history, even though it came from colonial states with the 1619 project, and from 1619 to 2019 etched out 400 years of prophecy about those who had traveled to a land and that was sold into their enemies. And as we can see who those buyers and sellers were, we can still see who those enemies even of the land is today. I'll go ahead and actually go to my other point as well, where we was talking about what I did put in the jumbo, what you put in the jumbotron. Thank you about the dukes. The dukes, when you talk about the bloodline of the duke, you have the list of dukes in Europe there. But if you also go to the point of the list of dukes, you'll see Genesis 36. And when you click on that, down at 40 to 43, you'll see the names of the dukes and that they're from Esau. And when you correlate the dukes with modern history, you'll go and end up in Europe and Europeans. So therefore, the dukes of Esau cannot be the children of Jacob. So with Dustin, I believe his name is Dustin Nemos, would he be able to go ahead and actually explain how the dukes of Edom, who are the dukes in today's society, known as the king and queen of Europe and many other dukes from France and other European countries, how are they the people who fit Jacob and the descendants of Jacob and the testimonies and the curses of Deuteronomy as Jacob? And also, would he like to hear about the 400 years of Genesis 15 verses 13 and 14, where it's 400 years coupled with the 1619 and 2019? And thank you very much.
Okay, so basically all of the monarchies, both Middle Eastern, Eastern, and European, have been infiltrated by the Jews. The Dukes of Edom would basically be the Rothschilds, the Soroses, etc., because Edom is the Jews who say they are not but do lie, and they merged into Judea from Judah when the Judeans of Judah, well, the Judahites of Judah conquered Idumea and merged into Judea. So that's the Dukes of Edom, and in terms of the 400-year, I would have to look at which verse you're talking about and such, but again, the white people have also been enslaved more so, far more so than black people throughout all of human history, and that includes the transatlantic slave trade. Again, more white slaves went to Africa than black slaves came to the U.S. as one of many examples. However, in terms of this particular verse, which one are you talking about?
I did the verses up in the Jumbotron as well. Genesis for the bloodline of Edom, and for the 400 years is Genesis as well. Genesis 15 verses 13 and 14, and that also speaks to the 400 years. And the links to the Bible and the other ones are in there as well. I think, brother Ian, there was another post that I had made about Genesis, and I think it might be in the same thread, but I'm not 100%. Yeah, it is. The 400 years from the colonial. I threw the Bible verse in the pictures. If you look at the first picture, it is right there. And he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And that's Genesis verse 13. 14 is also the other part, which is also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. And then you scroll over, and then I put what people in the world has 400 years of slavery, and you can see Google and the AI's response to that.
Okay. I'll check the top here, but off the top of my head, without even looking at this verse, and I'm not qualified basically to answer it just off the top of my head without researching it. I'd like to look into it more and get back to you basically, but yeah, I don't even know which period. I have to go and figure out which period of time we're even dealing with here. Let's see. Because there are numerous blessings and curses, and there were numerous times when the actual Israelites were basically taken from their land and thrown into slavery as a punishment. One of those times was as in like Leviticus 26:18, probably right after this period, where they were basically thrown into forgetting who they were and a form of captivity and wandering until the fullness of the nations and until 1776 and the other relevant dates based on when the actual tribes were conquered. So Manasseh and Ephraim became the U.S. and the UK based on when they were conquered, plus those amount of years in Leviticus 26:18 by the math perfectly. In terms of this one, I don't know off the top of my head, and we don't have a bunch of time for me to look at about yet.
Yeah, no, it doesn't take a lot of time actually.
DM me.
Yeah, it doesn't take a lot of time. For sure. And you can hit up Ian, and Ian definitely can set it up, and I'll touch base with Ian. Just because I don't follow you or nothing, but I'll follow you now and give you a follow. And whenever you feel free to get back, you can. But the thing I will say, just this in like less than 10 seconds, Ian. The thing about it is, from 1619 to 2019, it has been recorded in America under the American U.S. Congress as well. They actually made a date where they commemorated the 400 years in American law. I believe it was House Resolution. I'm not sure what the numbers were, but I'll try to get back to you on that. But the purpose of saying that is to go ahead and say that it does not coincide with the 412 years from the earlier Egypt, but Most High was specific with the 400 years. And there has been other people who were enslaved a lot longer in the world. But again, speaking to the specific topic of the room, we're speaking about the 400 years that the prophecy specifically speaks of. And when you go and Google just the specificities of 400 years and people enslaved around the world, the research results are very telling. And you can go ahead and do that due diligence on your own. And thank you for the opportunity to speak as well. Yeah.
Can I ask Dustin one particular question that's going to lay his premise to be false easily?
I want to point out something to what he just said too, real fast there, Ronald. In that particular verse that we were talking about, and again, I haven't looked it up much, I just pulled it up now. It also says in the next verse of verse 14, so Genesis 15:14, 14. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. I mean, that has not been fulfilled by Africans, even after their emancipation from slavery by white Christians, which, basically the Jews, I've never seen the Jews so angry as since white people took away their slaves, their black slaves, as today, basically, with what's going on in Gaza and such. But that doesn't fit. It's a stretch. It's from the wrong time period, and it is. I don't think it's a close fit at all. But anyway, just off the top of my head, go ahead, Ronald.
Well, respectfully, that topic was just a last days prophecy, Dustin, and it hadn't happened yet. And great substance is the demand for reparations that you're seeing in America that's taking place, and that's why I also went to say from 1619 to 2019, and not necessarily a prophecy that had already happened. But definitely do some more research and then get back to me, and we can have the conversation just to keep it going, because I know you're short on time. And I'll go down, Ian, because I know you got some guys want to come up. Great space. You and Truth Teller, great work, what you guys did over there with Flood guys as well, in that space as well. Great work. Continue holding on. Thank you, and God bless.
And God bless to you, LaFarmer, and thank you. And for everybody else that's got their hand up, I think the way that he just went through his inquiry, he provided some wonderful supporting documentation for it. That's a role model as far as I'm concerned for what I'd love to see. And so let's, in the interest of time, because I know Dustin is short on it, let's go down to Doc Holliday. I think, unless there's somebody else in front of him, perhaps Goyfather. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, it was the Goyfather, Ian. The Goyfather was before.
Yep. So I can make a comment, right, on the debate, Ian, instead of asking a direct. I can ask a question after, but can I make perfect? All right. So first thing with the debate, right, Ronald, respectfully, just stick to documentaries. For some reason, you committed an attribution error and a misattribution fallacy 3 different times, stating or quoting, trying to strawman or stillman Dustin's point and strawmanning him, saying Canaan is not Europe. Not once did Dustin say Europe is Canaan. You misattributed it because of your own belief of Africa being Canaan. Dustin doesn't affirm Europe being Canaan. No, he thinks Canaan is where Canaan is, and the Europeans are Israelites. So instead of rebutting any points, you committed an attribution error fallacy 3 different times. 3 whole different times. It made the whole thing intolerable and insufferable, respectfully. Next. At the same time as this fallacy, you were dish galloping instead of rebutting any arguments. All right. I went back, by the way. I went back and I looked at what he said. This is what he said after Dustin made his argument, right? His first one. He said, I'm going to go straight to the facts. Dustin asked him a question, by the way. He didn't answer it. He said, I'm going to go straight to the facts. Then for 30 minutes, ignored everything Dustin said and spoke about cultural links between Africans and Hebrews for around 17 minutes. And for the next 13 minutes, he spoke about the words in African languages and Hebrew languages that are linked. Then Dustin spoke for 18 minutes. He asked Ronald, what are his beliefs on Halpo groups? Ronald ignored it and said, a lot of what he said is incorrect. Then instead of rebutting him for 29 minutes straight, all he did was say random African words and link it to Hebrew instead of rebutting a single thing. It made the whole debate insufferable. Ronald, I understand you were looking after your kid and whatnot. Maybe next time you should make some free time so you can listen to people's arguments. It really was just insufferable. Even in the outro, you couldn't engage a debate. It's called refusing to engage. You are a fallacy king. I will give it to you. You are a fallacy king. You refuse to engage in the debate. Ian said, pick some of the arguments you think are the easiest to refute and take around 5 minutes. You ignored what Ian said and just started waffling for 15 minutes straight. All right, ridiculous. Also, you can't claim that Europeans, all their languages are Japhetic, etc. The Celt-Iberian language is not a Japhetic language. It has links to Hebrew. But, like you, I won't sit here reading out random different words. All right, I'll just leave it at that. Also, you said the Arabs just stole the Shemitic languages. So you contradicted your own argument. You said, you're not an Israelite because your language isn't Shemitic. Then you said, oh, even though the Arabs have a Shemitic language, it doesn't matter. You contradicted yourself. You kept talking about the Bantus, following rules of not kidnapping people and taking them slaves. I think you missed like half of the Bantus' history. Half of their history was capturing and kidnapping slaves. Like, I really don't know if you knew that or just chose to ignore it just for the fun of it. But the Kingdom of Congo, Bantu ruler, guess what? He was kidnapping the shit out of slaves. So no, they didn't ignore. They didn't follow that rule whatsoever. So you were very disingenuous, very dishonest, and you refused to engage. Committed 15 different fallacies. It was absolutely insufferable. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, I get a chance to respond.
Of course.
Okay, because I really want to ask Dustin a question. What the guy that just talked, he's just mad at the fact that I laid out straight facts. I got straight to the point, proving the Bantu's language, traditions, customs, oral history.
That's not how a debate works. That's bad debate ethics.
Can I just talk? You said what you had to say. Now it's my turn. I knew we had limited time. I didn't waste no time trying to go back and forth with his little questions. I wanted the
57 minutes.
I wanted the audience to hear the facts, the same facts that are in the movie Hebrews Wake Up Black America on Amazon right now, and the movie Hebrews to Negroes 2, Revelation, the Age of the Awakening on Amazon right now, that the Jews want to ban. So the problem that we have to understand is that the Arabs and Islam spread in many directions, to the east, to the west, to, of course, in Arabia. Even they tried to go through the Trans-Caucasus area with the Arab Khazar Wars, the Arab Khazar Wars 1 and 2, going all the way into the Dagestan and these little areas up in that southern Caucasus region. But they were defeated by the Khazars, or at least they stopped. They got tired of fighting each other and just settled on a truce and made intermarriages. So Islam didn't creep into the Pontic steppes and northern Europe and all these other places. But the Arabs and Islam did influence a lot of people, and a lot of people did convert to Islam. And because they convert to Islam, they're going to learn the liturgical language of Islam, which is Arabic. That's why people in Pakistan and Afghanistan, they can read the Quran and read Arabic, even though that's not their mother tongue. Same thing in Turkmenistan and other areas where traditionally it's a Turkic language area, but they can understand. Some of them can read the Quran. They know the Arabic language because of Islam. Just how the Khazars adopted Judaism and eventually started to learn the language of the Hebrews. The original Israelites in Bantu, Africa, they didn't have Islam come down to sub-Saharan Africa. The Islamic slave trade did not hit into certain areas that I mentioned where they were speaking Hebrew. How is the Timneh tribe in Sierra Leone speaking a language that's Hebrew when the British colonized the Sierra Leone? Was the British speaking Hebrew? Did the Arabs come speaking Hebrew? No, they speak Arabic. So how in the world do we see all this Hebrew in certain languages in sub-Saharan Africa? A lot of languages, actually. I only give you a couple. The Arabs did speak Hebrew. The Arabs spoke Arabic. Big difference. It
was 57 minutes.
Big difference. The Arabs didn't come teaching the people in the Congo or sub-Saharan Africa the traditions of the Old Testament, the Torah. They didn't come teaching that. That's not in the Quran. The Quran doesn't list out all 613 commandments. So they don't care about these things to come to sub-Saharan Africa to enslave them, but at the same time, I'm going to teach you the 1613 laws of the Torah. I'm going to teach you how to speak Hebrew. No, that makes no sense.
Ron, the Quran wasn't even out yet. Then.
The question that I wanted to ask Dustin is that he says that the Edomites are the Jews. He says that the Western Europeans he said the Western Europeans are the true Israelites, the Jews to the Edomites. So then the Eastern Europeans, who are they? Because you have R1B also in Central Europe.
Japhethites.
They're who?
So there are other whites that are not of Israel. All Shemites were white, and Japheth was white. Ham got the weirdness because of the Nephilim wife and the chromosomes. So
Dustin, if all the Shemites were white, then who are the descendants of the Babylonians? Who are the descendants of Arphaxad, Ashur, Aram, Elam, and Lud today? Who are they?
Okay, so the Japhethites became the other non-Western European Israelite.
No. I asked you a question. Who are the descendants of Shem if they're white? The descendants of Arphaxad, Ashur, Aram, Elam, and Lud. Who are they today?
The Western Europeans are the lost Israelite tribes.
Who are the descendants of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Elamites, the Arameans, and the Luddites today? Who are they?
A number of tribes. Now, early Babylon was
tell us.
It was a multicultural region of all nations after Noah. It was everybody.
You said they're white, so back it up. Who are they?
Okay, let me explain it to you since you don't seem to understand.
Okay, go ahead.
After the flood with Noah, they all basically were in Babylon, or what was going to become Babylon later at the site of like Eridu and other sites. Babylon wasn't even a city for like 1,000 years later. But during the time of Noah, the Sumerian time, the Tower of Babel at Eridu, and all of that stuff, you had a multicultural kingdom ran by Nimrod, son of Cush. I'm answering your question.
I said today. Today, living
Ronald,
today.
you talking about deflecting is hilarious.
Living today.
57 minutes, remember that.
The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Elamites, the Arameans, and the Levites. Today, 2024, today.
I don't have a genealogy on every single person, but
okay, I know you don't have the answer. Now, let me ask you a question.
I have all the answers, and you haven't rebutted a single point.
You don't have an answer. Let me ask another question. You cannot answer this question. This is what you cannot answer.
No, the debate is over. Ask your question.
Listen. We could go. I could go all day long. You already lost. Look at the poll. You are running.
How can you say running? 57 minutes.
Of Shem I already are white. The descendants of Shem are running out of people in the world. So who are the children of Gomer, Magog, Togarmah, Tubal?
This is ridiculous.
Who are these nations? Who are these nations today?
Where
are they at?
Spiral of doom.
If all of Western Europe are the Israelites,
Ronald,
if the Jews
absolutely
are
right,
Edomites,
brother, you have absolutely been right.
Then who are the sons of Japheth? Who are the sons of Japheth? Where are they at?
That is not the point.
So he cannot prove the sons of Japheth. He cannot prove who the sons of Shem are.
We are
big problem in that.
Of Shem.
There's a big problem.
If you ask me about the Hamitic Edomites and the Hamitic Cushites, and I can
go there too. He said that only one of the sons of Ham is black.
Japheth has nothing to do with tonight's debate. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Hang on, everybody. If we're going to try and have some kind of back and forth, that's totally fine. But if it's going to be questions with answers overlapping other questions, it's just impossible. And so I'm going to take Doc Holliday's recommendation. Let's just move on to the next question.
Children of light, and we will never let up, never giving up fight, yeah. We didn't make it through the night, yeah. Done the crawling all night, but keep your head up, Charlie. We were made for this life, yeah. Wait to see how we rise up. We've been down for too long, waiting for a come up. Better days around the corner, all the pain made us stronger, yeah. We aim for the long run, keep on surviving this war for no reason. Now we changing the season, yeah. Storm is over now. Storm is over now. Me I say storm is over now. Storm is over now. Storm is over now. Me I say storm is over now. Storm is over. Change is coming tonight. Can see the sky start to clear up. We've been waiting for life, oh. Never giving up the fight, no. Start a countdown right now. About to take off, yeah. It's our turn to rise, oh. We're the children of light, oh. We've been down for too long, waiting for a come up. Better days around the corner. All the pain made us stronger, yeah. We aim for the long run, keep on surviving in this war for no reason.
Let me speak to them.
So what's your name?
I'm Kweku.
Kweku from the Fanti tribe?
Elmina, Elamina, ancient town, Elamina.
Okay.
Which is Edina. We black people, don't forget about where we born. As long as you're a black man or black woman, you are Hebrew or you are Israelite, because it's a one thing. You see it? But Babylon them just divided so that you could know where we're coming from, where we are going. Yeah. And now you know yourself. That is why you touch the land. So my brothers, my sisters, you all, we are welcome. We are waiting for them.
Come home.
The mafia come home.
You're like Marcus Garvey said.
And that is a prophecy. So the prophecy must be fulfilled. And this is the time. The prophecy must be fulfilled. So we need you all.
All right.
One love, one heart.
cannot deny the feel inside of me. Whoa, I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. I will spread the news of your goodness. I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed. I wanna be free. I wanna be free. Well, I open my eyes to see the blood streaming down your seams, the blood and the water